This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at Kevin Kautzman and at Brad Kelly. And we're back with another fun-packed, action-packed, depressing, difficult episode of Art of Darkness, the podcast about the dark side of creatives and artists. I'm Kevin Kautzman, and I hurt myself today. How are you, Brad?
I'm doing well, man. Back in the saddle. We took a little breather, man. It's summertime. You can't be, down in our podcast lab and, we'll try to get here as much as we can, but,
Right, I've been trying to shake off the ghost of Virginia Woolf for at least a month.
Yeah, it takes some time.
Leave me alone. Her high English is like a drill in my ear every night telling me I need a room of my own, and maybe it's time finally to walk into the lake.
And I see you've been going to the lake a lot. It might cross your mind occasionally.
I'm trying to make that my brand on Twitter. In addition, at Kevin Kautzman on Twitter, and at Art of Dark Pod on Twitter. That's us. I'm trying to make that my brand on Twitter, where whenever I'm at a lake, because I live in Minnesota, I post at the lake and at the other lake.
Lake-pilled.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, lake-pilled. Take the lake pill. But another reason we took a break is that, and I've already hinted at who our subject is today. It is Trent Reznor. No, I'm kidding. No,
not dead, but
right, because one of the rules of Art of Darkness is that we only see dead people. And
that's right.
And if, God forbid, if someone passes away, we're going to give it a year and a day before we do anything on them. That's right. So no, of course, it's not Trent Reznor. Who are we talking about today, Brad?
We're talking about Johnny M. Effin Cash. Yeah.
Johnny Cash. God bless Johnny Cash.
Yeah, the man in black, man. So, absolutely.
I'm so excited about this episode because one of the fun things about doing this podcast is that we get to, I think, go deeper than the surface.
Yes.
And
the Wikipedia entry isn't. We're going to go well past the Wikipedia page on this show. So
I cannot wait to leap through the ring of fire.
Yes.
And maybe we will meet in Jackson. I love Johnny Cash, and not in a cliche way. I really, really dig the whole story.
Well, dude, and this is something we'll talk about. I've sort of had premonitions of this before, but as I was doing my research, I kind of realized that Johnny Cash might be the most universally beloved American musician. I mean, maybe not even American. I mean, you'll run into people who don't like the Beatles, right?
Kind of vehemently, they will.
Right.
Yeah, the Beatles overrated, overplayed.
Yeah,
blah, blah.
I ran into somebody not too long ago who hated Led Zeppelin. Which doesn't make neither of those two things make any sense to me. I have never heard anybody say they didn't like Johnny Cash.
The only time I've heard it is when somebody who is pretty hardcore in their musical taste, to which they say he's overplayed.
Okay.
And fair enough, but that has nothing to do with Johnny Cash himself.
Right.
That's not his fault.
Right.
So it's more an indictment of you if the depth of your sort of outlaw country appreciation begins and ends with Johnny Cash. It's kind of a get out of jail free card for people who are a little lazy with their musical tastes. You meet people who don't even know that Hurt is a cover.
Right, which is bizarre to me.
Makes me totally cray because I'm a pretty big Nine Inch Nails fan. I have been for a long time.
Well, when that happened, that was a merger of two of my interests. It was like Nine Inch Nails and Johnny Cash it's in the same thing. Like that blew my mind at the time. So that was cool.
We tend to start every one of these episodes with a question where the person who's handling the subject asks the other person, "What do you know about the subject.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm kind of getting ahead of that, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, well, Kevin, okay, what do you know about Johnny Cash?
I mean, I really probably don't know much more than the typical person. And I don't want to delve too much into like personal stuff, but I will say, no, I will. I think it's interesting. One fact that I believe is true is that Johnny Cash is the reason that Sgt. Pepper wasn't the #1 album in the United States for 2 years.
I believe that's true. Yes.
Was it Folsom Prison? Knocked?
I believe it was the live at Folsom Prison album. Yep. That's
right. And so musicologists talk about this as kind of an inflection point in the fact that there were kind of two Americas. There was the Beatles America and there was the Johnny Cash America. And I love that in the 90s, Rick Rubin and Johnny Cash kind of merged the two in this really intentional way. Yeah. I think that is one of the greatest stories in the American arts.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah.
I love it.
Got Johnny Cash on MTV. Right, and got high school alt high school kids listening to Johnny Cash. Incredible.
And my great aunt and great uncle, my grandparents would have grown up listening to Johnny Cash and watching him at on the Grand Ole Opry or whatever it is.
Right.
So amazing. What a wonderful alchemy that was. And then of course you have the great biopic, which biopics tend to be awful. They tend to be maudlin and sentimental, and for whatever reason, I think it's probably Joaquin, right?
Right. Well, Joaquin is a powerhouse. Yeah.
Transcends the genre of the biopic, shows you it's a really good movie, a very solid movie. I think the only biopic that I would consider to be superior in sort of the modern era would be Capote.
Yeah, Capote's good. Yeah, well, when you lean on an actor of that great of quality, Philip Seymour Hoffman or a Joaquin Phoenix or something like that, you can pull it off. You know, if the writing is good, the directing's good, the script's good, all of that, then you need that actor who is, top of the heap, This is why the David Bowie biopic, I'm not sure who that guy is, and maybe it's good, but I didn't see it. I watched the trailer. I was like, I don't even really want to watch this. Like, it doesn't...
may be one day that nails it.
Sure. Yeah, there could be. Yeah. So,
I don't want to hold forth anymore about what I know about Johnny Cash. I think it kind of begins and ends there. I think that I imagine I have this huge interest, but I'm genuinely excited to hear what you are going to... tell me about Johnny Cash. So let's go.
Yeah, we're gonna do this fairly linearly. My biggest reference, and I watched pretty much any readily available documentary I could, and many interviews. I read Johnny Cash had actually 2 autobiographies. I read the later one, and then my biggest resource is this book by Robert Hilburn, thick 700-page biography of Johnny Cash. It's kind of thought to be the sort of the go-to one, though there are a number of biographies, and they often will focus on one sort of aspect of his life. This is more of an overall. And Robert Hilburn was a music writer and who knew Johnny Cash. He, I believe, if I'm not making a mistake, I'm confusing with the other biographer, I believe Robert Hilburn was at Folsom Prison as part of Johnny Cash's entourage when the famous concert happened, and we will get there. So that's my sort of biggest resource, and I'll be reading bits from this from time to time. But we'll start at the beginning. So Johnny Cash, J.R. Cash is his government name, was born on February 26, 1932. He died September 12th, 2003. We kind of hit some of these points. I mean, other than maybe Garth Brooks, he was probably the most successful country musician of all time, had hits in every decade from the 50s to the 2000s, which is, I don't really know anybody else who's managed to pull that off. I know, Paul McCartney is still a recording artist, but, I don't know if he's making hits necessarily. He was... throughout the 20th century, he was not only notable as, one of the most notable performers, he was also a songwriter. And I know that maybe doesn't sound that odd to us, but in country music, there was a lot of you just played standards and things that studio musicians wrote and things like that. So Johnny Cash did play a lot of other people's work and kind of made it his own, but was also one of the most notable songwriters deeply respected by none less than Nobel Prize winning Bob Dylan, right? So yeah, so when Bob Dylan met Johnny Cash and Johnny Cash met Bob Dylan, they were both like starstruck. They were both like, oh, my brother, man, like you're the only other guy that gets what I'm doing.
To be a fly on the wall for that.
Right.
Oh,
right.
man.
Yeah, it's amazing. So he's born in Arkansas, and we're going to get to what that was like in a minute, but I want to imagine being about as poor as you can be as a white person in America, 1932. And then in the
depression.
End, yes, yeah. And then in the end, you own property all over the country, including in Jamaica. You're a member of both the Country and Rock and Roll Hall of Fames at the time of your death. You know what I'm saying? This thing we're talking about, arguably the most universally beloved musician outside of like the Beatles maybe and Elvis and like a handful of other. He's up in that echelon. No matter what, maybe there's not the superlative doesn't apply, but it's like Elvis, Beatles, Madonna, Led Zeppelin, Johnny Cash. He's in that stratosphere, right? So let's start back in Arkansas. So he's born in this little town, Kingsland, but really hometown is this town called Dyess. I've heard it pronounced a couple of ways. Dyess, Dice, whatever. Dyess. In 1935, they moved there, and it wasn't even a town yet. It's pretty interesting, actually. It was more properly referred to as Colonization Project Number 1.
What?
It was an FDR work projects administration like experiment, basically, right? And so what they were going to do is they had 520 acre farms, and you would apply and you would be essentially loaned like a low interest or no interest loan of this 20 acre farm, right? Including like there was like a house, there were prefabbing houses on them and that sort of thing.
Sure.
And Johnny's dad, there was tons of people that applied. Johnny's dad was one of the 500 families that got it. There's really only one official constraint, is that you had to be a white person.
Yeah. No moonshine.
Yeah. So, anyway, they moved in 1935. Johnny is 3 years old. They moved to this property.
May I ask, what is the Cash family beyond white? Are they
Scottish?
They're Scottish.
Primarily Scottish, especially on the Cash side. It's not as clear on his mother's side, but on the Cash side, they actually they can trace their lineage back to 1667 in the Americas. So this is like a deeply American family, right?
Right.
From practically the Mayflower. So been here forever. So they moved there, and Johnny's got some siblings. He's got two older brothers, Roy and Jack. Jack's going to be important. He's got an older sister, and then he's got a younger sister, Reba, who's just a baby. Dad's a World War I veteran and was sort of known as this hardworking kind of dude. He had done like hoboing around, like he would hop a freight train and like go work on something for a few weeks and hop a freight train back, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I learned something interesting recently on the way back from your wedding in Michigan.
Yeah.
We were in Green Bay. We were stuck in Green Bay. We went to the train museum.
Yeah.
And I learned what hobo comes from. Do you know what the word hobo? I heard that it comes from homeward bound.
Oh, really? Okay.
So if you were a hobo, it was somebody who was on your way somewhere, as opposed to, I think, a tramp was something which is just somebody who was like almost like living on the rails. I don't want to get it wrong, but I learned that.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And the hobos were generally people who were looking for work,
Yep.
And I know a little bit about when I was like in middle school, when people asked you, what do you want to be when you grew up? I wanted to be a hobo.
Yeah, well, now you're a podcaster. You're a hobo of the airwaves.
That's right. I'll show up on any podcast. You just give me a time.
At Brad Kelly on Twitter. Hit him up. Yep.
So, okay. So they moved to Dyess, right? It's the Depression. We're talking 1935. So this sounded like the promised land. The government's going to loan us a 20-acre farm. All we got to do is work hard, and that's just fine with us. But it's pretty clear to everybody who moved there that this was kind of a wonky deal. Okay, so there was a reason this land was just given away.
Are you telling me that the government screwed some people over, Brad?
Well,
whoa.
I don't want to.
Oh, not the American government. No.
Yeah.
Small money.
Okay. I'm going to black pill you. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So it turned out that this was sort of a land swindle deal that this dude had a bunch of useless land and found a way to sell it to the government for this project, right?
Same as it ever was.
Yeah, it was highly undesirable, and it was thickly wooded, and it was weedy. The very few people who were from the area referred to it as quote unquote sunken lands. Oof. Because there'd been an earthquake in the early 1800s that had shifted everything. And there were all these like sinkholes, and it was like with dirt that they called gumbo. Like you couldn't make it. It was very, very, very difficult to scratch a living out of this. Right?
I hate to do this so early, but I think a good episode title would be Johnny Cash and the Sunken Lands.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad.
That might stick.
Yeah, I like that. So, there were this is the kind of situation where the whole family's working, right? Mm-hmm. The kids, as soon as you can walk, you're dragging a sack and you're growing cotton. And so hard work, but somewhat of a musical family. Oh, so one thing, just to further give you a picture of what's going on, they've got a mule, right? They work behind a mule that's like dragging their cotton, and they're picking cotton by hand and putting it in the bags, right? This is the first job. Johnny's doing this when he's like 6 or 7 years old.
And you're going to get calluses and bloody fingers. And
it's not easy. And it's Arkansas. It's hot. This is not pleasant. So they would do something that we think of more perhaps in America, we think of this being more of a slavery kind of thing, where they would sing in the fields while they're working, sing gospel music, sing what they called hillbilly music, and that sort of thing. And this is sort of the introduction that Johnny gets to music. They would have a transistor radio, but early on, they didn't have any running water. For instance, like this is as poor, about as poor as it gets. You're living on land that the government sort of gave you, basically, because you didn't have anywhere else to go. Now let's think about like Johnny's singing. This becomes a big deal, but like many men who become famous, become sort of successful musicians or become known as having a good voice, he didn't have a good voice when he was a boy, right? For men, it usually happens after puberty. Their voice matures and becomes the thing it's going to be. Johnny's got, he's got these brothers, and we won't talk about too much about them except for Jack. Jack is his older brother. He's his best friend. Jack tells Johnny that God put you on earth to be a singer, right? So they have this sort of deep relationship. Jack is a special kid. Even when he's like 13 years old, people in the community would come to him for like spiritual advice. Like men who were having a hard time, were drinking too much, would maybe come to him and talk to him about like what to do about it.
Are they Baptists?
They're Baptists.
They're Baptists.
Yep, they're Baptists. Okay. And so it was pretty clear that Jack was going to be a preacher, obviously. And he may have even done like some guest spots at church, that kind of thing.
Open mic,
right? Open mic preaching. So he was. So we've got this boy who's clearly a special kid, right? Like whatever you say about the religion, if you've got the charisma and the wisdom that adults are coming to you for guidance, and everybody thinks you're something special, but you've got something going on, right? So we've got them, and he's the golden boy in the family, and Johnny is sort of Ray, the father, the patriarch, doesn't like Johnny. This is clear from day one.
That's never fun.
No, it doesn't help. But they're working. Johnny's singing. Johnny's always wanting to sing. He's listening to as much radio as he can. He's listening to like the Carter Family and all these sort of classic kind of things that are on the radio. And then one day his voice drops, and he's out singing in the yard. And his mother comes out and says, Johnny, they weren't even calling him Johnny then. He was just JR. Was that you? And he says, yes, ma'am. And he says this in multiple interviews. And she says he says she put her hand on him and said, the hand of the Lord is on you. You have a gift. And that sort of like sent him in this direction, right? So Ray, the dad, thinks music is a bunch of BS. He thinks it's a waste of time. You should be focusing on picking more cotton than you did last year. You know, Ray doesn't ever care about this. And this will be a theme. This is like maybe the first, Beyond the Poverty is like the first thing that we would call the darkness on this show. Dad never approves of this. It doesn't even matter ever how much success you have. You can never approve. And I don't know if it's because he can't go back on what he said originally. Like, I don't know what it is, but his dad can never give him a nod and say, this is okay. Like, you did it.
Maybe there's an attitude of it's not manly somehow. It's not masculine. It's kind of a womanly thing. I'm just speculating.
Yeah, I would think. Yeah, I don't know. And it was sort of never. And you know, he's not a guy who's going to talk about it either. You know, he's not going to explain to you.
He's a hard man.
Just a hard-bitten dude. You know, World War I veteran, sharecropping. You know, hopping freight trains. What is this silly nonsense that you're doing? So, despite all of this. This is one of the great legends. We'll tell you one of the great legends of Johnny's life, which apparently is true. Johnny's mom, who, you know, everybody was doing like spare work and that kind of thing. Johnny's mom had like pulled together some extra money from like doing people's sewing or something.
Sure. And that's how it used to be.
Yeah, that's how everybody, and she got Johnny some singing lessons with this woman in town. And so Johnny goes to her and he wants to be a singer, right? So he's trying, but she's got him singing like Irish ballads and stuff like that, and it's just not working. They do a lesson, it's not working. They do a second lesson, it's not working. They do a third lesson, and finally she says, all right, why don't you sing something that you would want to sing? Let's see how that goes. And he sings like a Hank Williams song.
He immediately sings 9 Inch Nails.
Right, I hurt myself today.
I'm sorry, I'm getting things mixed up.
Right. That was dark, Johnny. Jeez,
how old is he right now, roughly? Is he a teenager?
He's like, I think he's like 12 or 13.
Okay,
if I remember right. Anyway, he sings this Hank Williams song that he knows by heart, and she closes the piano, and she says, "Hold on." He's singing Hank Williams' Lovesick Blues. She closes the piano. She tells him, lesson over. Don't let anyone ever change how you sing, ever. And that was it. That was the only formal singing lessons that he ever had.
I just got chills.
Right. And you've got your mother telling you have a gift. You've got this woman telling you that like this, you're something else entirely. And you're living in this, you know, you're in this environment and you're hearing the only outside access you have is the radio, right? So you're like, you got to start dreaming at that point, right? So, you know, they're in this town. There's a couple other things that happen to Dias, and then we'll get out of there. One or two of them aren't that big of a deal. One of them is a big deal. One is Eleanor Roosevelt comes to town. I just thought this was charming, sort of historical thing. And when Johnny's a boy, he actually meets Eleanor Roosevelt. She like shakes his hand and pats him on the head or whatever as she's like in town because they're observing the, you know, colonization project #1. How's it going here? Right? Not so great.
Sounds like such an un-American thing. I think
doesn't
we forget
it really?
how.
Just to call it colonization project #1.
It sounds like something right out of like Ender's Game or something.
Right. You will, and you get like assigned to a team, and that's your Another thing is there are, you know, because it's a vaguely sort of socialist project. They have like a music center, and then like, you know, the government pays various bands to come in. And one of them that comes through, supposedly, I didn't read this in the Hilburn biography, but I saw this in one of the documentaries. Supposedly, the Carter family came through, and we're going to talk about the Carter family. They're going to be actually a big deal in the Johnny Cash story. But apparently, when Johnny was a boy, he saw the Carter family, which is
literally laying eyes on his future wife as a boy,
which is interesting. So, and the Carter family is roots Americana country music royalty, right?
Sure.
It's as big as it gets, especially at this time period. Now there's another thing that happens. This is kind of rough. So he's got his older brother Jack, and Jack is this lovely kid, and Jack is willing to bring Johnny places with him where, you know, most kids don't want to bring their younger siblings. And one thing that Jack did for a little bit of extra money is he would take timber to the wood shop at his school, and he would cut it down into fence posts for people and sell fence posts or whatever. And, one day he's going to do this, and Johnny's going to go fishing, and Johnny's like, come fishing with me. And Jack has this weird kind of premonition-y feel that he doesn't want to go cut timber, but he kind of knows he has to. And so ultimately he goes and he does it. And he has an accident with the saw. Okay, and so I'm going to read a little thing because I'm not going to be able to tell it as well as this thing tells it. This is
moral of the story here is if you're a young person and they want to send you to shop class, say no.
Right.
I'm going to be a podcaster.
Yeah, I'm going to be a podcaster.
I don't leave me alone. And the coach will love you.
Yes, right. So the saw cuts him open, cuts his stomach open. There's a moment of Jack staggering around trying to shove his intestines back inside of him, right? And he would live for a week like this, just slowly dying. And so I'm going to read this bit. Jack started to groan and asked Mama to hold his hand, Cash said, remembering the farewell scene late in life. He said his brother closed his eyes and told Carrie he was at a river. One way goes to the bad place, the other way goes to the light. I'm going to the light. Then he said, can you hear the angels singing? Look at this city, this beautiful city, the gold and all the jewels, the angels. Listen, Mama, can you hear them? And that was apparently about the last thing that Jack ever said. And so it's pretty rough. And so
pretty heavy. Yeah,
and the family's obviously grieves for this for a long time and in some, not particularly healthy ways. I'm going to tell you, and this is where Ray, the father, and Johnny's relationship got even worse after this. I'm going to read one other little bit. Grandpa, who's Ray Cash, Johnny's father, Grandpa always kind of blamed Dad, Johnny, for Jack's death, says Cash's daughter, Kathy. And Dad had this real sad guilt thing about him his whole life. You could just see it in his eyes. You can look at almost any picture and see the dark sadness thing going on. Dad, Johnny, even told me that one time when his daddy had been drinking, he said something like, too bad it wasn't you instead of Jack. I said, oh my God, Dad, what a horrible thing to say. And Johnny said, yeah, I think about that every time I see him. Right. So,
I mean, and this is right at a formative time.
Oh yeah.
Not grieving the death of your brother in this horrible accident.
Right. Johnny's 12, and I think Jack was 15, if I remember right. So,
and this strikes me as a family that's not, with the father, not emotionally equipped to navigate this.
No, because you've and this isn't necessary. I don't want this to sound like a bad thing. You've sort of exteriorized all of your emotional stuff to the church.
Sure.
And maybe that's fine 95% of the time. But when something like this happens, the church is only one part of what's going to help you get through it, right? You got to come together as a unit somehow. You can't, and so.
Right. There's no universal way to grieve.
Right.
The family should have its own.
Right. And the church, like I said, the church can help. But I think their thing was like, well, you just go to church and that's it.
Just trust in the Lord. Right. At a certain point, it just everything devolves into cliche and pandering or whatever.
And some of the church stuff sounds great until you're 12 years old and you're confronted with a pain as deep as anybody's ever going to experience. It's I needed a little bit more than that. And having your dad tell you he wished it was you instead isn't. That's not.
And your dad goes to the bottle. Sounds like.
Yeah. So anyway, I want to leave you with one image here because it's an image I'm going to tap into a couple other times that I think kind of strings together the internal life of Johnny Cash. So, but then we're going to kind of leave Dias. Johnny would often, especially after Jack's death, he would often walk the country roads at night by himself and sing. And so you imagine him out there just walking and singing these old country standards. He loved gospel music. So walking the country roads and singing gospel music. And you have to imagine him thinking about Jack. You have to imagine that Sometimes when he walked that same route that he took to go fishing while his brother went to go have his accident, you know. So this is a scene for him, a motif for him, this walking down a country road by himself at night, singing his heart out.
He's walking the line.
He's walking the line. That's right. That's right. That's right. So high school comes and goes, you know, he gets a little bored. So one other thing is Johnny's a pretty introverted, shy kid, sort of on the intellectual side as far as you can be, being like a sharecropper in Arkansas. Right. So, but he gets a little bit of confidence. He starts singing in church and that kind of thing. And high school ends. First thing he does is he goes up to, actually comes up here to Michigan to build Pontiacs, hates it, almost immediately decides he can't do it and he's going to join the Air Force.
So he went from Arkansas to Detroit?
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Yeah. Which was at that time was a kind of common, like in the blues world, that was like a common, you migrated from the South kind of thing and came up to Detroit to build cars. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot, well, especially as the Depression ended, it was some of the most like reliable, well-paying work you could find. But so anyway, he joins the Air Force and then the war in Korea starts like almost immediately after he joins. Right. So it wasn't happening when he joined, but but it started up when he was like, still in training.
I'll get college paid for and I'll get some benefits. And,
right. And it's like, wait,
clearly war has got to be over after
World
War II.
We had World War II. I missed that.
Now, clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, whoops.
Yeah.
My great uncle was in Korea.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
That would be where I first heard Johnny Cash, was in their house.
Okay. Yeah. And that's sort of the great, that's like the war that we forgot that we fought, Korea. Yep. You know, we don't really.
Yeah. The only time I saw my great uncle shed a tear was when I picked his brain about Korea.
Really?
And he drove, he was an army, he drove truck in the army.
Okay.
And it really broke him down because he had to talk about how some of his buddies got blown up behind him.
Sure.
Yeah. And this is a guy who, you know, worked a union job in North Dakota and just never talked about it.
Yeah. Well, you imagine you're a young kid and you just go to some country.
Literally off the farm. You have no business being in Korea, and there you are.
I mean, honestly, you might not even know where you are on the map.
Yeah, he had a 6th grade education.
Right. So he doesn't know what Korea is.
What are we doing?
He might have heard the word one time, you know.
Like, you're just going.
Right. And so Johnny joins the Air Force. One thing, you know, just kind of getting his psychology in here too a little bit. People always knew, you know, we know of him as this great singer and talented writer, right? But, and, you know, maybe the next rung down in the description of him is, you know, he's got a big heart. He's the man in black because he cares about the downtrodden, which seems to have been like a legit thing about him. He actually did care about people. But, you know, he's also got demons.
I think about substance abuse when I think about Johnny Cash.
Yeah, right. Definitely about substance abuse. When you get for a little bit further down that list of descriptors, this is something everybody says about him. He's like, he was deceptively intelligent. Like, he read a lot. He was obsessed with history. He was a very religious person, but like he knew the Bible and he knew the scholarship and he knew the theology. So he's a very, very smart and very perceptive guy, right? So he ends up doing really well in the military. Like, he does it very well in basic training. He does really well in his courses, and they decide that he should be a radio operator, right? So I'm going to read you a little excerpt. So he never is in combat. Okay, so this is about the trajectory of the radio operator thing. If eventually accepted as an intercept operator. So this isn't just talking to people on the radio. This is literally listening to encoded messages from, quote unquote, the enemy and trying to figure out what the actual message is, right? If eventually accepted as an intercept operator, John would have to listen to the competing signals through headphones for up to 8 hours at a stretch, trying to distinguish the real transmissions from the decoys. Once the Morse code was isolated, he would then jot down the letters and pass them along to a group of translators who would try to decode them. The more John learned about the intercept mission, the more motivated he was by the touch of glamour and adventure associated with it. He even imagined himself living out some of the World War II spy movies he had enjoyed back in Dias. He liked the thought of being a hero. Wait until he told Dad about this.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
That is really fascinating. And that is not for a dummy. That is some really hardcore.
It's concentration and focus, and you have to have an ear, right? Like, and it kind of makes sense that somebody who's a musician would be able to do this. You have to distinguish the subtle differences between very similar tones to say, well, that's part of the code, and that's noise, right?
And Morse code in Korean is particularly difficult.
Oh, sure.
It's a joke. But yes, I mean, and trying to have to parse what's real and what's not, and
when they're particularly trying to send this sort of obfuscated sound at you. So, like, you can imagine he's just hours and hours and hours at a time trying to focus on this. So, now, before he left, he would be stationed in Germany. He would never actually go to Korea. So he's intercepting messages from there, apparently. Before he leaves, he's in San Antonio, Texas for a while as part of his training, and he meets a girl there. Yeah, so he meets this girl, Vivian. They don't spend a lot of time together, but he is totally in love with her, and she is apparently in love with him. And it becomes primarily a romance by correspondence. And they write letters to each other almost every day. Johnny probably pretty close to every day, for 3 years before they see each other again. Talking about marriage, the fact that he loved her, and, what they were going to do when they got back together, and, all of this. And in the meantime, he's hunkered down with a bunch of other young men. There's a little bit of partying going on in Germany. They're not actually in Korea, so you'd work and you'd get R&R occasionally and that sort of thing. So he dabbled in that. He partied, drank a little bit. He probably, it's not confirmed, but he probably slept around a little bit. I mean, he's 19, 20 years old. He also would sing with some of the other guys in the barracks. If somebody had a guitar, he would sing.
What year are we in here? Are we kind of in the mid 50s, late 50s? Is that where we are?
So this would be 1932. This is like 1940. This would be like 1950.
Okay. 1950. So the Beatles aren't quite in Germany.
No.
But Johnny Cash is there, and he's in the army, and and he's a lady killer. He's out there hanging out with the Fräulein.
Yeah.
But he's writing a woman in San Antonio every day.
Yeah, he loves her, and he intends to marry her when he gets back, and he's sort of struggling with his she's the one thing about her, she's a Catholic. And
the one true faith.
Yeah, right. That's like our tertiary tagline for this show.
I was an hour early for mass today, and so I felt really bad. Well, we didn't stick around.
I see.
Like a good Catholic,
I was going to say, my parents used to go to church an hour early to get good seats. So
there you go.
Well, there's a charming story about this. So she's Catholic. He doesn't know what Catholic is, really. And so he meets another Catholic in the Air Force, and apparently
he's in the Air Force.
He's in the Air Force. Yeah.
Okay.
He would apparently pester this other Catholic guy about what is it? What do you?
That's the most Protestant American thing in the world.
And there's like
I'm from experimental colony number 1.
Right.
Is that what it was?
Yeah. We're colonization project number 1.
Colonization project number 1, and I'm a Baptist.
Right.
What is this Catholicism? Because I really love this girl.
Right.
Oh man, what a hoot.
So we're not going to spend too much time in the Air Force stuff, but there's 2 notes that I want to hit because they're relevant. So one is he sees a documentary while he's there called Inside the Walls of Folsom Prison, which with what comes up later, it becomes relevant. So he finds this documentary riveting. He sort of associates the prison life with kind of the regimented military life. Like he sees a parallel there. And then he's keeping up with music as much as possible, buying records and listening to the radio and all of that. He hears a song called Crescent City Blues, which this cracked me up. If you read the lyrics to Crescent City Blues, it's basically Folsom Prison Blues, almost exactly.
Well, and of course, the Crescent City is New Orleans.
Right.
Interesting. So he poached a little bit from that.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
The lyrics were so close that eventually in the 70s, Cash would have to pay the guy who wrote Crescent City Blues like some tens of thousands of dollars in settlement. It's like here's the one thing. Cash did write the line, "I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die."
Okay.
That was his. That was not in Crescent City Blues. But a lot of the rest of it, like the "I Hear the Train a-Comin'," that's all in there.
Straight out of Crescent City Blues. All right. Well, what's the saying? Great artists steal, something that.
Yeah, well, here's the other thing, too.
It's the blues.
It's not like Cash stole this like late in his career. He was like, he'd never even probably thought it would be popular. It's just like a song, so I don't ding him too hard for it. But it was surprising to me to read the lyrics of it and be like, holy smokes, this is almost exactly the same song.
I gotta look it up.
Okay, so he gets back from Germany. He pretty much immediately gets married to Vivian. And so let's talk about Vivian just a second. Vivian, she's roughly the same age. She's a gorgeous woman. She's kind of exotic looking, to be honest. And I looked up her enough and there's another story we're going to bring up a little bit later because it's actually relevant. She's sort of like, I think, Sicilian or something, but she has like a sort of Spanish sounding last name. I don't know if I have it written down here, but she's a striking looking woman. And she's very, she was not only raised a Catholic, but she was a devout Catholic, right? So this was important. This was important to her, and it was important to her family.
That can cause an awful lot of tension.
Yeah. Well,
Catholics
this is why they had to
get Protestants to this day among certain families. That's a thing.
It's not great, and there was some friction there with the family, and the fact that they got married almost immediately, I think kind of knocked some of that down.
Yeah, it's really tough because one side is totally wrong. And the other side is the one true faith. Of course, I am joking. But I think we have to put ourselves in that time as well, because of course, living in sin would have been almost unthinkable. And Johnny is not going to convert to Catholicism, I assume. So there's this strange kind of extra difficult layer there.
Absolutely. And it also hints at, there's some things going on here that hint at something that, about some truths about Johnny Cash too. So like, he's this podunk kid from Arkansas, right? He marries a Catholic woman, doesn't even know what Catholic was, right? Asking questions like, well, they do what? He had a number of black friends in the military, including Johnny did not write the song Blue Suede Shoes, but the song was Blue Suede Shoes was Johnny's idea, because there was a dude in his barracks, this black fella, who liked to dress really flashy when they went out on the town, and he wore blue suede shoes. Johnny Cash gives the song idea to Carl Perkins, and Carl Perkins eventually writes that song for Elvis. Right? So it's kind of a weird little factoid. Yeah, and then Johnny, and I'm also sort of just showing how progressive Johnny is. So, marries a Catholic, has black friends, and regularly hires Jewish guys to help him, right? So he's for a dude in the 40s, 50s, 60s out of Arkansas, seems real chill on race, religion, and creed front kind of thing.
I wonder how did his dad take all of that? Was his dad a little more old school?
I never got a hint of that, but I imagine he was a little bit more old school. But maybe not. Maybe
getting into the military and getting to see Germany a little bit, maybe that kind of, it sounds like it might have been good for him. He got off the farm, he got a taste of Detroit, he got a taste of Germany,
you start to meet people, and it seems like at some point he decided, like, you just treat the person how that person is. That's the best route. So anyway, comes back from the Air Force, marries Vivian. They move to Memphis. Now, Memphis, if you don't know geography, Memphis is far west Tennessee. It's practically Arkansas. Like, it's only, I think, like 45 minutes or maybe even a half an hour drive from Dias. So it's basically moving back home, but you went to the city. And the big part of the reason that he moved there is Johnny's older brother, Roy, lived up there and was working as a mechanic. Johnny figured he could probably get there and, find some kind of work. But there's an interesting thing that happens here. So, Kevin, do you know about Sun Records?
I know about Sun Records a little bit. I've seen the documentary.
Yeah, so Sun Records is what Nat was in Memphis, it was what we would now probably call like an indie record label, right? It was a pretty small time operation. Elvis came out of there. Jerry Lee Lewis came out of there. A few people who were a little bit less well known now, but who were pretty well known for their time. and the country music industry was centered around Nashville, which is significantly to the east, and this is in Memphis, so it's kind of its own thing a little bit, not entirely, but it would be like, can't even really necessarily think. It would be like a Detroit to Chicago kind of thing. There's some mixing, but they're also distinct from each other.
Tennessee is a very wide state.
It is, right?
A 2 or 3 hour drive between Memphis and Nashville.
Yeah, it's narrow north to south, but it goes away. Yeah, so but there's an interesting thing. July 4th, 1954, Johnny Cash gets to Memphis. July 5th, next day, July 5th, 1954, Elvis Presley steps into Sun Records and records for the first time. Right. So there's something
percolating.
Yeah, there's a kismet that Johnny Cash just shows up there, right? Like this is like
Elvis was Army, right? Or was Elvis Air
was in
Force?
The Army? Yeah, Elvis was in the Army.
Johnny Cash Air Force, Elvis Army. Okay.
Yeah, and they didn't know each other yet, but they would. And so Johnny still loves music. He's written a couple songs he hasn't really shared with anybody. When he moves to Memphis, he starts working in this place called Home Equipment. And he's selling refrigerators and stoves and things like that, sometimes door to door. The guy who runs the place, this guy named George Bates, Johnny Cash would basically look up to him like a father figure almost, and even decades later would like refer fondly to George Bates. And part of the reason why is Johnny Cash was a terrible salesman, and George Bates just used to give him advances all the time. Like you'll figure it out.
Johnny, it seems like your heart might not be in sales, but you know what?
Right.
You're a good worker, and I believe in you, Johnny.
Yeah, and you did your, and I think one thing that can be easy to forget, and there's still a little bit of this, though it's more on the surface than maybe it used to be, where it was like, well, he served his country. You got to give him a chance. Like, you know what I mean? He did what he could to help this country in the war effort, and we're gonna. He's a good boy. He's got a lovely wife. And, right. And he's trying to make his way in the world. Right.
Yeah.
It makes me think of that scene in No Country for Old Men when Llewellyn comes back.
He's coming across,
right? And like he's in a medical gown and all of that. And the guy says, "Did you serve?" And and they have this back and forth. And by the end of it, the toll booth guy is like, "Somebody give this man a ride to town." That kind of thing. Like you get a break because you served. Which that's cool. I think that's a reasonable thing to do. So anyway, he's trying to sell stuff, and Johnny can't do it. One thing is, when he does make a sale, if it didn't seem like the person could afford it or needed it, he felt terrible. So there's like
he's a softie.
Yeah, there is. There's like I'll skip ahead a little bit just to give at the end of his salesman career. He says in this interview he did with Bob Costas that there was, like, his last day, there was some woman who clearly didn't have a lot of money. He's trying to sell her a refrigerator, and she says, she starts to like advance towards maybe buying it, and he stops her and he says, "Listen, you don't need this thing." Like, he didn't
go get something used across town. I know a guy.
Exactly. Like, look you up. I'm sorry I came and laid this on you. Like, you don't need this. Like, so that you can't being a salesman. It's not for everybody.
No.
Okay. So there's another thing going on in Memphis at the same time. So his brother Roy is a mechanic, and he works with these two guys, Luther Perkins and Marshall Grant. And these guys kind of like to mess around on guitar, right? And Roy says, "Hey, why don't you meet up with my buddies Luther and Marshall, and I don't know, you guys can hang out and play some music or whatever." And so they do, and those two guys end up being the Tennessee Two. And the three of them at one point were called the Tennessee Three, but they decided it was going to be Johnny Cash and the Tennessee Two eventually. So they're playing around, and Johnny Cash and now Elvis is coming on the radio, right? And then it's like, oh, Sun Records, this is in Memphis? Like, right? There's a sense of like, wait a second, like, I'm listening to something on the radio and they recorded it right over there. So it's starting to become real to Johnny, right? Like, there's a pathway, like, and so they're messing around playing, and they're not very good. So this is one thing about, and you can hear interviews with either Marshall or Luther later on, where they'll admit, like, we didn't know what we were doing. Like, but they weren't talented. It was like, it almost reminded me of, like, you hear stories about, like, the Ramones or the Sex Pistols, where they're like, we don't know how to play. Like,
it was never the point. The point was to not be Pink Floyd. The point was not to be King Crimson.
Right, exactly. And so this is where the especially the early Johnny Cash stuff, it just sounds like like it's just like this guy, it's very simple. Like, and they were fine with that. That was cool, right? In fact, at one point they put like I think it was Luther. I get Luther and Marshall mixed up. I think it was Luther. He puts a piece of paper in the guitar so it gets a slight snare drummy sound to it, right? So it just adds that, like, that little bit of whatever that noise is to make it even more boom chicka boom.
Yeah.
So let me read one thing about this, about their playing sort of style and kind of what they sounded like. And it was interesting too, because, like, Johnny was super serious about this. He's like, I want to be on the radio. And his buddies are just like, yeah, it's fun. We, like, hang out and we drink beer and we play some music. And Johnny sings. Johnny's got a pretty good voice, and it's kind of fun to, it's very interesting that there's sort of like differing attitudes about it within the same group. Okay, so this is again from the Hilburn biography. They all looked to Luther Perkins' guitar as the heart of their sound, but he was unable to move beyond that simple tick-tack, or hunt and peck style. John played the first note and the second one and asked Luther if he could do that. Luther worked and worked on it. Must have been an hour or two, and finally he got it, Marshall said. That's about all we achieved that first night. And this is when they were starting to try to work with Sam Phillips at Sun Records. Over the years, rather than apologize for their limitations as musicians, Marshall saw those limitations as a secret weapon. Our inability had a lot more to do with our success than our ability, he said. If we had done what we wanted to do in those days, which was play like all those great musicians in Nashville, we would have sounded like everyone else, and that would have taken away from the character in John's voice. Though long embarrassed by his lack of range on the guitar, Luther too grew to be proud of the sound he brought to the group. You know how all those hotshot guitarists race their fingers all over the strings, he'd say, time and again. Well, they're looking for the right sound, and I've already found it. Right? So there's something cool about that, right? Like the beginner's mind kind of thing, right?
Kind of a punk band in a way.
A little bit.
We're not going to play too many notes. We're not going to wow you with that, but we're going to wow you with the overall picture, and we got an ace in the hole in Johnny Cash.
And Johnny's Cash's voice, right? And Johnny, pretty much, there's a little bit of back and forth, but pretty much as soon as he stepped into Sun Records, this guy Sam Phillips, like, he knew that Johnny was something. Like, he could tell there was an authenticity and a uniqueness to his voice and the way he emoted, and he apparently, he looked like it seemed like he could maybe write some songs too, even though, like, wasn't really, they didn't know if that was going to be the route eventually at first or not. But so he starts recording with Sam Phillips. They're obviously they're amateurish, and Cash has already got a little bit of creative differences with Sam Phillips. Johnny wants to play gospel music too, and Sam's like, there's no way we're making a gospel record. That's just not happening, right? Because Sam Phillips is running this little indie label. Part of the way that he makes money is, like, if you want to come in and make a record, like, for your girlfriend, right? You can pay for studio time and he'll press vinyl, or for, like, a kid's birthday or something. And Sam, literally two people worked for Sun Records at this time. Sam and, like, his administrative assistant. So
Sam's the engineer.
Yeah, he's the engineer, he's the producer, he's the promoter. He'd, like, drive records out to radio stations. He was, like, I actually reading his biography, I came to respect him a lot. Just, like, his attitude and how hard he was working. He'd started the record really, he's a white dude, but he'd started the record really because he thought there was all this great black music in Memphis, and he wanted to, like, popularize it. And, that's not how he ended up making a lot of money, but that's not particularly his fault.
He's the guy that broke Elvis, though.
He's the guy who broke Elvis, yeah.
Forget about it.
Right. So Elvis is coming out at this time. So Johnny happens to be there for one of Elvis's first performances. Literally, there's a drugstore grand opening, and Elvis is playing on a flatbed truck that's driving up and down the street. He only had one song at the time. And Johnny and Vivian and, like a few other people from town, like saw it basically. Now he's on the radio, but like, this is literally, I think it could be wrong, but I think this was Elvis's very first public performance that Johnny Cash was at.
Wild.
So, so kind of crazy, right? So anyway, by the time they get to Johnny being in Sun Records and starting to get recorded, Elvis is already sort of rising to fame, at least locally. They have a first song. It's kind of a great song that Johnny puts out. It's called "Hey Porter." It's a song that he wrote.
I know. Hey Porter, and it's the Shoeshine Boy. Is that the one, or is that a different one?
It's a Shoeshine Boy. It's about a guy who's like returning to the South on a train.
Okay,
he's sort of talking to this, but all the Johnny Cash voices there. It's really strong. It's great. Of
course. Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. Yeah, so, I love this idea though too, because it gets us to this train metaphor,
which he hits over and over and over. Yeah, it's totally his thing.
And it's fun because the musicians riff off that. They play off this idea. The music tends to sound like a train. It's chugga chugga chugga.
Yeah, that's great. And that's kind of why it works. Yeah. It's like this onomatopoeia thing almost, right? It's like, and he will hit the train thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, I got
almost to the point where it becomes cliche. Does it talk about the Shoeshine Boy?
No. I got it wrong. But no, it's good. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, and it's got this sort of southern thing. I'm coming back down south.
Right. Yeah, it's a good song, and it was pretty popular locally. I mean, this wasn't enough for Johnny to quit his job at the home equipment store yet, but it's pretty exciting to have your song on the radio. This is the thing. Johnny Cash has, when you look at it historically, he has like a meteoric rise. It's like it's kind of incredible, and I'm going to sort of outline that a little bit here. So let's see. So one thing that happens fairly early on after Johnny's had a couple songs on the radio is RCA buys out Elvis's contract, and now Sam Phillips basically turns all of that time, money, and attention to Johnny Cash and promoting him, right? So
he's already made Elvis. We sent him off. We made him national. He's going to be one of the biggest stars in the world, and now I'm looking for the next guy.
Right. And so by the time you get to Cash's third single, it's number 14 on the Billboard country charts. Now the Billboard charts are like a big deal in the 50s. Like that's how you know exactly how successful something is. Now it's all sort of
it feels like it's bought and paid for, and it doesn't make any sense. It's like the New York Times bestseller list. It's all fake.
It's not clear. Yeah. It's not clear what makes a song successful anyway. Like even you can go on YouTube, and if something's got a couple million hits on YouTube, that's successful. But like, did it actually make any money? That's a whole different question, right?
Mm-hmm. This means units moved. We are selling vinyl.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So Vivian at the same time is also pregnant. She's pregnant with her first kid, and there's this interesting synchronicity. Just 3 days after the first time Johnny appears on radio, Vivian gives birth, right? So it's literally happening at the same time. First baby, job that's not going well, but I'm on the radio. And this is where the problems start developing in the relationship between Johnny and Vivian, because Vivian is this very conventional Catholic girl. She married an Air Force boy. She didn't marry a country music star.
Yeah, country music star. Oh, many such cases occur.
Right. Yeah. And he wasn't that when he wanted to be, and he probably even told her he wanted to be, but it was one of those things like, well, yeah, you got a nice voice, but like, why? You're going to be okay. You're going to be a country music star. Like you don't think it's actually going to happen, and you certainly don't think it's going to happen in like 2 years that you're suddenly going to be touring and, playing sold out shows and things, because it happens pretty fast. In fact, pretty early on, Sam put, this is before, I'm skipping around a little bit, but this is before Elvis's contract gets bought out. Sam puts Elvis and Johnny Cash on a tour. So there was a time in like 1955 where you could have seen Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash at a show at like a church in Tennessee someplace, right?
And they got their hair combed over and all slicked back and a lot of pomade and the suits
and Johnny's sort of struggling with this a little bit because it's what he wants to be doing, but and he liked Elvis. He said Elvis was a great guy, super fun, smart guy, smarter guy than people give him credit for. But the one thing he felt weird about was that Elvis was always pulling strange. And Johnny was like, I don't know about this.
Oh, Elvis was a little bit of a playboy, huh?
Yeah. Well,
all right.
we all know he was sort of a heartthrob, right? So he could, and Johnny probably could have, maybe to a lesser extent, but he definitely could have.
50s in the South.
Right.
Yeah, oof. I'm just trying to smell it.
Right.
Can you just smell these shows and all of the different products and the hair and the way,
weird outfits, I'm sure, and like
and the tour bus and come back. Oh man,
right.
Hot. So, not enough air conditioning at the time.
Oh no. I don't even know if they had air conditioning at that. You were sweating constantly.
You show up in some civic center in some remote town in Tennessee. You're 90 minutes from Nashville.
Right.
You just eating pancakes on the road, syrupy pancakes. You're on amphetamines and drinking beer, and and Lindo wants to come back to the tour bus.
Right. Whew. That's a scene. That's definitely a scene.
Oh yeah.
And so Vivian had problems with this whole touring thing, right? She did not like it.
Yeah.
And this is actually why Johnny wrote "I Walk the Line." And it's kind of weird that you would write your first big hit would be a song about how you are devoted to your wife, and then you would later divorce her, and that would still be your biggest song. Yeah, you have to sing it every time you play a show. This song you wrote to promise your wife that this was all going to work out.
Yeah,
it's sad. I mean, it's kind of ironic and sad, but you know, the thing is, it's like, and this isn't necessarily forgive Johnny for some infidelities, and we're going to get into that, because he's one of these guys who sort of seems like he kind of couldn't help himself. He was sort of a romantic who he needed somebody to be there.
Hey man, tour is tour.
Right.
It's a story as old as time.
Yeah, and so you got that, and then you got on the flip side, Vivian wasn't meant to be the partner of somebody who was going to go do this touring thing, right? Like, she didn't come out with him, and she didn't try to make it.
Well, she's got a baby at home,
right?
She's not going to come on the road and watch him open for Elvis, and
right. Yeah.
What is that even going to look like? She's going to be out in an RV in the back. I mean, it's not going to work.
Yeah, and she wasn't encouraging of it either, you know. So there's this tension, you know. There's got to have been sort of tensions like, well, she doesn't care anyway, like, so, which makes it harder. It's like she doesn't even want you to be out here doing this at all. Like, she doesn't care about your dream.
How old were they when they got married?
Well,
they're pretty young, in their 20s, right?
They were like 21, 22. Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of issues in modern life, but it's tricky, right? There's a reason that marriage is being delayed, and this is one of them, because adulthood is being delayed. You're not really realizing
you're
yourself.
Not who you're going to be yet, right?
Yeah.
And so you don't know what you're going to be like. And then, you know, I mean, the opposite thing could have been, you know, if Johnny Cash wouldn't have done what he did, okay, he could have just stayed home and tried to make the home equipment store thing work. Right. Never tried to get on the radio. And like, what good would that would have been good for Vivian and who else? You know, so it's a weird, it's a tricky,
tricky thing. It's tricky.
Mm-hmm. So let me read this thing. So he's like, you know, skyrocketing to fame a little bit here. I'm going to read this thing from the Hilburn bio again. So let me read. I hope the audience knows Folsom Prison Blues. So in 1955, Cash writes Folsom Prison Blues, which becomes sort of a hit, but then becomes a bigger hit later in the 60s. I want to read you some of the lyrics. I should have done this earlier, but I want to read you some of the lyrics from Crescent City Blues. And I hope people already know the Folsom Prison Blues lyrics a little bit.
Who wrote Crescent City Blues?
What was this guy's name? I
can look it up too.
You know, it should be right here, but it doesn't say.
Read the lyrics and I'll look it up.
So I hear the train a-coming. It's rolling around the bend. This is Crescent City Blues.
It's saying it was written by Gordon Jenkins, and then Beverly Marr sang it.
Okay.
All right.
And I ain't been kissed, Lord, since I don't know when. The boys in Crescent City don't seem to know I'm here. That lonesome whistle seems to tell me Sue disappear. When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son, When you grow up, I want that you should go and see and do, but I'm stuck in Crescent City just watching life mosey by. So there's some differences in there going on. I see rich folks eating in that fancy dining car.
No, you ripped it off.
They're probably having pheasant breast and Eastern caviar.
Uh-huh.
Now, I ain't crying envy and I ain't crying me. It's just that they get to see things I've never seen. If I owned that lonesome whistle, if that railroad train was mine, I bet I'd find a man a little farther down the line. So it's basically the same song.
Yeah, you ripped it off. Okay, all right.
Now
that's a little dark.
It is. Here's the big difference. This is from Folsom Prison Blues by Johnny Cash, and just read you one verse. When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son, always be a good boy. Don't ever play with guns. But I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. When I hear that whistle blowing, I hang my head and cry. So, I mean, but I shot a man in Reno
just to watch him die. I love that line. That lyric is the best.
It's brilliant, right? Yeah. So he stole this song, but he added something that clearly wasn't in the original that set it apart. So
is the tune the same?
The tune is similar, but the Folsom Prison Blues is apparently faster, but the tune is very, very similar. So
it's the blues. I don't really care that much. It's not like this ruins my opinion.
It was just eye-opening to me to be like, oh, he didn't like.
He should have credited them. It should have been Folsom City or Folsom Prison Blues from the Crescent City Blues.
Yeah.
So,
I Walk the Line comes out. I think it's his fourth release. I Walk the Line comes out. Now, you mentioned Grand Ole Opry before. For folks who don't know, the Grand Ole Opry, I think it still exists in some form or fashion, but it started in 1925, and by the 1930s, it was this 4-hour radio show that you could hear in 30 states. It was like the big. It was
an institution.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
A cultural force for country western music.
Right, absolutely. And Johnny being from Nashville, the Grand Ole Opry
You mean Memphis?
I'm sorry, Johnny being from Memphis and the Grand Ole Opry being in Nashville, there was resistance to him sort of making it on there. He had played and done really well at something that was called the Louisiana Hayride, which was like the second tier Grand Ole Opry. It was also like an interstate radio show, but it wasn't quite as popular. But he'd done really well there.
Louisiana Hayride. That sounds like what Elvis is doing in the bus.
Yes.
Well, you know who else this reminds me of a little bit is, and I don't know his whole story. I'm not up on him as much as I should be, but Willie Nelson is something like this, where he carved out his own scene. Away from Nashville, because if you were in the business at the time he was coming up, you were supposed to be in Nashville. That was it. But
it reminds me,
Willie's stuck in Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me a little bit of like the grunge reaction to glam rock, or like the punk reaction to like Pink Floyd. Like it does remind me a little bit like, these guys don't know what they're talking about, and the music's getting staler and worse, and and we're gonna do this boom chicka boom thing, and we're gonna sing about shooting people in Reno, and so there's some grit there, some genuine, some authenticity. Now, so he couldn't get into the Grand Ole Opry at first. But when I Walk the Line came out, it was a huge hit, and the Grand Ole Opry could not deny it. Like they had to let him come and play, essentially. Now,
is he in black at this point? Is he the man in black? When does that start?
He frequently wore black, but it wasn't like an always had to be every time. In fact, I think I watched the Grand Ole Opry performance. I don't know if it was the first one or not. He did wear like white in a Grand Ole Opry performance, so it wasn't as diehard of a thing that he liked, but primarily it was still his color. But here's the thing. So let's just give you a timeline of how quickly this happened. Cash meets Sam Phillips in Sun Records, 1954. July 1956, he's playing the Grand Ole Opry.
That's wild. Right? That's totally insane.
That's insane. It's like, and he moved to so this was like he met Sam Phillips, I think, in late 1954. So you're talking a year and a half.
We're talking about country music, Carnegie Hall.
Right. Exactly.
That's like a classical musician. I played Carnegie Hall. Okay. Right. All right. This is the country music.
It's an insane leap in a career, I think. I mean, he's probably recorded 8 or 10 songs at this point.
Yeah. Does he even have an album out, or is it all singles?
I don't think he hasn't had a full album out. They're just releasing like a single, a two-sided thing, one song on each side.
What are they? 45s? Is that what they're called?
Yeah, I think they were on 45s probably. Yeah. So, but just, I couldn't believe this. That's a startling jump in your career.
But he's on the road. He's stepping out. He's walking the line, but he's maybe stepping over the line already.
He's stepping over the line here and there.
And, doing barbiturates with Elvis.
So interestingly, the drugs didn't start right away, but I'm about to get into that point. Okay. So drugs. Every episode of Art of Darkness, at some point, there's not one artist who's been completely... That's
clean.
That's true.
Maybe we'll find one. I don't know.
I don't know.
We will.
So one thing, he's popular. He's playing the Grand Ole Opry, and this means he can now play anywhere in the country, right? You play in the Grand Ole Opry, you can go play any place, right?
Almost like maybe not a household name, but we're right there.
Right. And especially anybody who's like actively listening to the newest country music, like they know who Johnny Cash is now.
Yeah.
So he's touring then, man, it was you and like as few people as you could get away with loading into a car and driving driving 12 hours, do a show, drive another 12 hours, Waffle House, another 12 hours. One of you is sleeping in the back, one of you is at the wheel, the other one's looking at the map because you're lost in the middle. Johnny, apparently, they did not let him drive, actually. He started driving at first, and both Marshall and Luther thought he was so bad that he was going to kill him, and so they wouldn't let Johnny drive. Now, at some point during
that is a great way to get out of having to drive on a road trip, by the way.
Right. Just be
one
terrible.
Well-timed swerve, and you're off duty.
Right. Be careful what you get good at.
These are little life hacks that come with Art of Darkness.
That's right.
artofdarkpod.com. On Patreon at Art of Dark Pod.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's still hard work, even if you're not driving. Yeah, be careful what you get good at, people. I'm serious. They will make you. The world will make you do it if you're good at it.
That's a great point. Yeah.
So at some point in this touring, it's hard work just staying up and playing shows, blah, 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 blah. Some other country musician introduces Johnny to amphetamines. And it's just like, here you go. This helps me get a little pep in my step, And at that time,
you're off the road 12 hours. Maybe you got rained out from another event or something, but you're going to make this other gig.
Right.
Yeah, man.
And and then the thing is, not only do you have to make that drive, when you rush onto stage, you got to be on. Right, you got to be energized.
There's no green room in the back with a shower and somebody waiting there for you with some Perrier.
Right,
you're in some civic hall or some church hall.
Right. And you might be playing for 500 people or something, but the amenities are limited. So he gets into amphetamines, and at that time, you could get a doctor to prescribe you amphetamines. And Johnny actually tells a story that sometime
you still can, Brad. Let's not act like
they have different names though.
Sure. Okay. All right.
There was a time and Johnny would talk about before he couldn't get them for prescription, which is how he would get in some legal trouble. He would tell stories about he would be passing through a town when he was starting to be kind of famous, and he would just call any doctor that was in that town, and he'd say, "Listen, doc, this is Johnny Cash, and I'm having a little trouble getting through this tour, and I was just wondering if you could prescribe me something to get me to the next town." And then he just gets a bottle of,
This is really Johnny Cash? Why, yes, it is.
Yes,
I'm
it is.
Johnny Cash, and I need some hard drugs.
Right.
Sir,
doctor. So he would,
you just try to imagine a doctor saying, "Well, can you sing me Walk the Line?"
Right.
I'll write you a script tonight, Johnny. You got to come sing that hit song right here into the telephone.
Right.
My wife's going to listen.
Right.
I wonder if that ever happened. It might have happened at some point. Prove you're Johnny Cash.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he's got to sing a song. All right, those black beauties are getting packaged up right now. So he got into the amphetamines, and then he also got into barbiturates, right? Because you need the amphetamines to get you up for the driving and for doing the shows and hitting all the notes. But you're so keyed up that when you go back to the hotel room, you got to be able to go to sleep, because it's your only time to go to sleep.
Now we're in the sunken lands.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is where it happens.
Up and down.
Yeah.
So so now here's another thing that goes on. He's doing these pills. The pills allow them to tour longer and harder, right? And that means he's away from home even more, which ironically, it was a long time before Johnny's family understood that the pills were a problem, but they were a problem because they allowed him to be out at sea longer, basically, right? And then he's starting to meet other women. He's starting to get interested in other women. He meets he's have these like affairs of the heart where he'd like get a crush on somebody and like be sort of infatuated with them. And sometimes something would happen. Other times something wouldn't happen.
Well, and let's be real too. This is a kid from a farm, from a project. Farm,
really? He's from the projects.
Yeah, who now has a very serious sudden taste of fame.
Yeah. He's been on the Grand Ole Opry,
and he shows up, and everybody knows who he is, and he's got a hit song. I can't even put myself quite in that place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the amphetamines. So you have the amphetamine. So by the time we're hitting like the late 50s, he's pretty well, the pills pretty well got their hooks in him. His marriage is sort of falling apart, though it's going to take a long time before it actually falls apart. And in 1958, lured by more opportunity for more money and the promise that he would be allowed to make a gospel album, Johnny Cash signs to Columbia Records. He is given a $500,000 in today's dollars advance, plus twice as much in royalties per record, right? So this is like a really good deal. Plus they're going to allow him to make a gospel album, which he's always liked to do. It was kind of heartbreaking for Johnny to break up with Sam Phillips. He always liked Sam Phillips, the Sun Records guy, but you got to shoot your shot in a way. It's sort of similar to the marriage thing. He's sort of like, well, listen, I either do the thing that I'm meant to do, that my brother told me God put me here to do, or I capitulate and compromise and back down, right? Like there's no two ways about it. So I think you see this in Johnny Cash.
The minor league, and we're going to level up. We're going to go play at the majors now. Right. Just like Elvis did. Look, I got to make this deal. This deal is too good a deal.
Yeah, I got to do it. So, and then 1958, he's starting to cross over too. So, he's playing shows on Lawrence Welk. He plays again.
Hey, the greatest North Dakotan.
Right.
Lawrence Welk. One of us. One of us.
That was show at that time at least was recorded in California, though.
Oh, was it? Well, but he's from North Dakota.
I know he is in North Dakota. I was just surprised to know. Yeah. But I guess they filmed everything in California.
Well, look, Brad, he was able to get out of North Dakota.
If you shoot your shot.
Some really tough winters. Shout out to the people who were there.
For sure. So he plays the Grand Ole Opry again in 57 or 58. He's still playing the Louisiana Hayride, and he's just getting more and more and more successful. 1957 and 1958, he would play about 300 total shows. So, we're talking about a show every 3 days or something for 2 years.
And the travel in between. That's the thing that kills you. It's not the show that kills you. It's the travel.
Yeah, it really is. Right. Yeah. So he's driving from town to town to town to town to town. So now moving to Columbia, there's advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, there's more money. And so now $500,000, and I said that was in today's dollars, plus he's selling records. A $500,000 check just shows up on your door. That's a lot of money to reckon with, right? But he's now on this new label, and there's this sort of problem that happens where this guy Don Law becomes his producer, and whereas Sam Phillips had been very Sam Phillips was a creative guy in his own right, and he was a hands-on producer. He was like, no, we should try this song. No, it should be more like this. He would arrange things, and he would talk to you about what you're trying to accomplish and all of this. Don Law just says, well, I got this superstar musician. I'm just going to record whatever he does. And it doesn't really work out quite as well. Like there's like in terms of creativity, there's sort of this slump that starts in the late 1950s. And Johnny is given maybe a little bit, I hate to say this because I like the idea that he got artistic freedom, but in terms of what was put out, we see this, like, he starts making these concept albums that sort of halfway work. Like he makes a gospel album, which is actually kind of good. he makes this album called Songs of Our Soil, which is like super focused on death, I think, because he was super pilled out. It's like more folk kind of music. Then he makes this album called Ride This Train, which has like 4 good tracks on it, but is really self-indulgent because every song Johnny introduces it with this like spoken word thing. It's like, now we're going to Oklahoma, and then Oklahoma, you know what I mean? And then the next song is about like Texas, and is
everything all right at home, Johnny?
It's a little much, honestly. And then so this period, in 1964, you get this album Bitter Tears, which is all about the plight of the Native Americans. Again, there's some good songs in there, but again, and it's a sort of self-indulgent thing where it's like, dude, people just want to hear you sing a song that like resonates with them. We're not sure if we really want. And the Bitter Tears thing, though, was kind of interesting because the Native American community loved him for it. The radio wouldn't play it, and Johnny actually took out an ad in Billboard magazine calling out radio DJs. It's like a letter calling out radio DJs for being gutless for not playing this music. So it's not when Johnny Cash had the famous wagging the middle finger photo, but it's kind of a moment like that, right? So yeah,
wagging the middle finger photo is from the second Folsom, right?
Yeah. I think what that came from, there's competing stories about what happened. The most reliable one I could find was that somebody had asked him what if he had a message for the warden.
Nice. So, well, this is interesting. So we already have this kind of combative bad boy kind of to take out an ad like that and to call out the DJs is pretty radical.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it partially came from his records weren't selling as much, you know, and he sort of thing, and it was like, well, you know,
like maybe he's not in his right mind either. He might be under the influence of certain things, and nobody's going to tell him no at this point.
Yeah. Well, and the drugs are really starting to take hold sort of early. They've taken hold already, but by like 1960, like everybody around him knows it's an issue too. Like he's lost weight, he looks weird, and sometimes his performances are really bad. Like apparently this particular pill that he was taking, it did this thing where it would like dry out your throat. And so he would have shows after a pill bender where like he could barely even talk, and they were apparently just terrible.
That's
right?
not good.
It's not good. So,
and he's headlining at this point. So you're showing up to see Johnny Cash, and he's croaking.
Right.
Not good.
Yeah, but at the same time, by the early 60s, he's essentially a wealthy man. He moves the entire family out to California because one thing is Johnny Cash thinks he can also be a movie star, which was not a good idea.
Like Elvis. I think Elvis probably had a little place in Johnny Cash's brain.
No, looked like that's what you did, right? Why wouldn't you just do what Elvis did? I mean, it sort of makes sense. And you got to think like there wasn't as long of a history of pop music stardom at this point. We're talking 50s into 60s.
There had never been anybody like Elvis. Elvis was a new thing.
Right, exactly. So there wasn't it wasn't clear how you should do it, really. But anyway, in the early 60s, he moves the whole family to California. He actually buys Johnny Carson's old house, which I just thought was an interesting note, for $750,000 in today's money.
That would be the taxes on it now.
Yeah, exactly.
Johnny Carson is going to be a great episode when we get around to that. That's going to be a good one. I might have to do that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
but yes, we're focusing on the other Johnny right now.
Yes. So let's see. So, all right, I want to give you a sense. I went so deep into this. It's like I struggled to figure out which details not to put in, but I want to give you a sense of how screwed up he was on drugs. Okay. So I got okay, here we go. This is from the Roger Hilburn biography. Cash was likely high on pills the night of September 29th in Beverly Hills when he picked up a container of propane gas and threw it in the trunk of his car without making sure the lid was secure. As Cash headed home at around 30 miles per hour on a residential street, the container fell over and the gas leaked into the passenger compartment, where it suddenly exploded, perhaps from the spark of Cash's ever-present cigarette. Remarkably, Cash was able to leap from the rolling car and suffered only minor bruises and burns on his face and arms. The car continued on down the hill until it struck a lamp post. The fire was put out before the can of propane or the gas tank could catch fire. Cash declined medical attention at the scene. So
he blows up his own car?
He blows up his own car.
That's usually not a good
sign. And there's a whole bunch of these sorts of things. Like one time he wasn't allowed to return to the Grand Ole Opry for like 5 or 6 years because he was super pilled up. And he accidentally, with the mic stand, like trying to pull the microphone out or adjust it, he accidentally breaks one of the stage lights, right? And then what he says in later interviews was he liked how it sounded. So he just took the mic stand and dragged it across and broke all of the stage lights out.
Right. And this is not that type of show.
Oh, it's the Grand Ole Opry.
It's a little stiff. It's a little, we're Christians, waspy Christian,
right?
Middle America, Southern, feel good.
Right.
And Johnny Cash is a bad boy, but boy, you wear a bolo tie.
Right.
And
you stand up straight.
Right. And you pluck and you sing and you get off stage, you take a bow, but no bueno.
Yeah. And there were other kind of weird things that happened. Like there was a couple venues that he wasn't allowed to go back to because he had painted the mirrors in the hotel room black, or in the dressing room black. He'd painted the mirrors.
That is dark. That is dark. That is one of we're investigating the dark side of artists on this podcast. Yeah. That is one of the darkest things that I've heard yet.
Right.
Somebody painting the mirror black.
Yeah. Why
in a hotel room?
Think about why you would do that, right? Like the psychological process that makes you decide. And And there was also, I think it was Carl Perkins. There was another musician who knew him who said one time they were in a hotel room and, this other guy, I think it was Carl Perkins, but it might have been somebody else, had broken something in the hotel room. And Johnny Cash said, don't worry about it. That thing, that they'll just charge you $45 to fix that. And he's like, well, how do you know? He's like, well, I broke one of those before. And then they proceeded to, Johnny called out everything in the hotel room and he told Carl Perkins what everything would cost if you were to destroy it. And it turned out later that he was right about all of it. Like he had smashed everything in a hotel room on multiple occasions.
That is wild.
Right.
Is he mixing these pills with booze? Is he drinking too?
He would. Drinking wasn't really his problem as much as the pills, but he also drank.
Yeah, you throw a few whiskeys on top of all this and now you're
right
in a bad place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He had a joke. Johnny Cash has a joke that he would say. It's a very Mitch Hedberg kind of thing. He says one of the prison shows. Somebody says something about you want to drink a whiskey or something like that from the crowd. Somebody says that to him, and he says, "No, I don't drink anymore." And plays a note. I mean, I don't drink any less either. I don't drink any more.
That is kind of a Mitch Hedberg line. I approve. Rest in peace, Mitch Hedberg.
Yeah,
That'd be another good episode.
Yeah, it would be a good episode.
Yeah. He's buried not too far from here.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, he's a Minnesota guy. That's right.
It. St. Paul.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so 1964, he's already been famous for a minute. He's rich. But we're getting the real stagnation. 1964, I think, is when Bitter Tears comes out. We're hitting a slump. Go ahead.
Kind of the low point here. I don't want to derail you.
Yeah.
However, I do have a question at this point.
Sure. Yeah.
Why is Johnny Cash an addict? What is he running from now? I know the movie makes it pretty clear that it's the pain from his brother and the pain from his father. Mm-hmm. Is there anything more to it, do you think?
I think there's that, and I think there's also, so I definitely think that's part of it. I do also think there is a sense of, okay, so he, like anybody who reaches fame in the way that he has it, attention gives him some kind of validation, right? And so if it's like, all I got to do is take this pill and then I will have the energy and the power to put on a show that people will like, right? So there's that. So it's like the sense that this thing gives you power. But I bet
if you took, like today, twice as much Adderall as prescribed, and then you got up and did the greatest show of your life, and you felt better than ever, and it just felt right. I could see how then very, very quickly that could escalate into a serious problem. You're chasing that feeling again.
Right. Absolutely. And then there's also the thing is, we haven't talked much about it, but Johnny is a very religious guy. And I think there's something that can happen with people who are deeply religious and concerned with sin, their sinful nature and all that, where you get into a sort of a loop where it's like, you can take the drugs to numb you from the feeling of guilt you have about taking the drugs. Right. And so it's this vicious cycle. It's like you do messed up things because you're on drugs, and then you feel terrible about them because you have this strong sense of right and wrong. And then you numb yourself from that feeling with those same drugs. Right. So there's that.
I wouldn't know anything about that, Brad.
No. Okay.
I wouldn't know anything. Yeah. I don't know where you're getting that from. Right. Yeah.
I've heard.
Yeah. No, I think that's probably pretty astute.
A part of that, I think.
The other idea that comes to my mind, and this is speculative, but he's somebody from not even a small town. He's somebody from the middle of nowhere. Probably growing up didn't even have that many social connections. Just the sheer number of people he probably saw between the age of being a little boy to coming of age was probably pretty slim. And now he's in New York to meet with Columbia Records, and he's in LA, and he's in totally different environment. And probably the ups and the downs probably helped him manage a certain amount of shell shock and culture shock from that transition.
Oh, I think that's definitely part of it too. Yeah, he's and the other thing he said in an interview was like when he started taking it, much like the pharmaceutical crisis now, it was like, well, doctors give you this. Like it can't be that bad for you. And then by the time you realize it's bad for you, like just from your experience with it, the hooks are already sunk.
Sounds to me like Johnny Cash was a science truster.
He did trust the science.
He did trust the science. We did get some good tunes out of it though. So
hey. He said later on that he didn't regret any of it.
So all right. Okay.
Yeah, so that's something. Okay, so I realize I'm enjoying this, but like we're gonna hit 2 hours and we're gonna keep going.
Let's keep it going. And by the way, if you subscribe to the Patreon, patreon.com/artofdarkpod, you get access to After Dark episodes where we go into the way that we researched each episode. We go a little more off the cuff, and we invite you to subscribe, extra content, and you can support the show.
Absolutely.
Hey, I don't care if we go a little long for Johnny Cash.
It's fine.
Right? It's fine with me. This is the Man in Black here. Let's go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, trying to think about where I want to take with this. Okay. So, one thing we want to hit in this middling slumpy period. He gets a show at Carnegie Hall. At some point, this guy named Saul Holoff takes over managing for him, and Saul Holoff is brilliant. He, like, in terms of managing a talent thing, and his idea was like, Johnny Cash can have mainstream appeal, and I'm going to make that happen, right? And so Saul Holoff gets Johnny Cash to play at no less than Carnegie Hall. Grand Ole Opry was the country music Carnegie Hall. This was Carnegie Hall.
Carnegie Hall. That's it. Doesn't get any bigger.
Johnny Cash plays this show so pilled out of his mind that people, I don't know if they booed, but it was clearly a bad show.
Oh.
Right. So bombs Carnegie Hall. And hates himself for it. Like, is miserable and, thinks it's over and all of these things for it.
And how much I'm just trying to think of like New York City, 1960-ish, mid-60s.
63, I think it was.
Have the Beatles broke yet? Have they broken yet quite then?
It would have been at the edge of breaking if they hadn't already.
Happening. And now you're in New York City and oh man, I can't even imagine what it must have been like to go back to that hotel rorum after
paint those
bombing.
Black.
Yeah, man. Oof.
Yeah. So pretty rough, right? Okay, so now, the other thread I want to keep in here is the Johnny Cash, the romantic, right? We haven't gotten to the love of his life yet. And he's still married in 1964. He's super pilled out. He's now well known in the country music community, and two of his best friends are Willie Horton, who is a well-known country musician at the time, is people just sort of don't know who he is, and Billie Jean Horton. Billie Jean Horton had actually been the young wife of Hank Williams, and when Hank Williams died, right? So she's like known as like the most beautiful woman in country music, right? And he becomes good friends with them. Let me give you this anecdote on 204. This is again from the Hilburn biography.
Biography.
Yeah. So Willie Horton dies in a car accident, right? And this is after that. Johnny Cash is pilled out of his mind, looking for love, even though he's still married, has kids at home, has 4 daughters at home in California. Oof. Billie Jean Horton says that Cash showed up at her concert wanting to talk to her again about a future together. But any slim chance that she might change her mind about marrying him was ruined when Cash arrived at the hotel later that night and pounded loudly on her door, clearly under the influence of drugs. Furious at yet another rejection, he later stormed out of her room and smashed every crystal chandelier in the hallway. After being called by the hotel manager, Holliff agreed to pay for the damage, but it wasn't enough to keep Cash from being banned from the hotel. Right, so just in a rage, smashing everything, you know, and that's where he was. Like that was the in '64. That was like the level of intensity, rock star, anxiety, stress, depression, you know, madness that he was clearly influenced by.
Probably needed a year off and treatment, and I'm not touring for a year. I'm going to go hang out with my girls and the family, and I'm going to talk to a psychiatrist, and we're going to get this sorted. But it sounds like he didn't have quite the intelligence or the people around him. This often happens with these great stars, where the people around them just ride them.
Well, I mean, everybody's making money off of him, right? He's got his guitar player, Marshall Grant, and even Marshall Grant and Luther Perkins, they felt like they didn't like when shows got ruined, obviously. I mean, who would? But like, they didn't feel like they were even part of the creative process almost to a certain extent. Like, they'd be like, they would look at the Billboard rankings and be like, oh man, Johnny's not even on this chart. Like, Johnny's screwing up. It's like your bands too, right? It's a very interesting sort of process. But
at this point, you're an institution. You're not just one guy. You got a lot of people relying on you.
It's a lot of pressure. It's a ton of pressure. And so I want to paint one more. I had that call back to that image of his childhood of Johnny walking that road, the country road at night singing. Here's another image of him during this phase of his life. Johnny Cash would come home to California, and he and Vivian just fought and argued and didn't get along. And so Johnny Cash would come home, and then he would immediately drive out to the desert. And what he said he would do was he would just get pilled up, and he would sometimes just lay on the ground in the desert and look up at the stars for hours at a time. Right. Just so that's where he is. He's a millionaire by today's standards at the time. Can't even face his home life at all. And then sometime in here in the 60s, in the mid 60s, we get what I want to call the Ring of Fire phase. One of his most famous songs, arguably, it depends on what your taste is. One of maybe his best song.
Not his song. He didn't write it, did he?
No, he didn't write it. June wrote it. June Carter wrote it. Yeah. It's a great song. It's got these great mariachi trumpets at the beginning, which are great. It's got a nice groove to it. And apparently that was Cash. That was his idea, and he arranged that. Like he wanted that. He said he heard it in a dream. Probably
just these trumpets. I hear trumpets, June.
Right.
Calm down, Johnny. It's gonna be okay.
Yeah. So Ring of Fire. So
what a great tune.
Oh, it is good.
When I was growing up, that was the one that everybody knew him for. You knew him for a number of them, but that was the one you heard more times than
absolutely.
You'd even care to hear it.
Absolutely. So, Ring of Fire was written by June Carter. June Carter was part of the Carter family, that great American institutional band that he had seen back in Dias as a boy. And how this came to be is obviously Johnny Cash had his touring band had expanded beyond just the Tennessee Two, and he had multiple people, backup singers, and that kind of thing. At one point, Patsy Cline was singing for him, who would later go on to have her own sort of, meteoric fame, but very short-lived. And Saul Holoff, who was, again, brilliant manager, he knew Patsy Cline was going to leave, and he was thinking like, well, okay, how are we going to replace her? And then in the chess, in the sort of chess strategy thing was like, okay, well, what is the best possible thing we can do here? He realized that June Carter was available. June Carter would not only be less expensive, but it would than Patsy Cline was, but having June Carter in the show would tie Johnny even deeper into the American institution of country music, right? A member of the Carter family is at this show. So now if you're 70 years old, you want to go see Johnny Cash, right? So links them up, not thinking at all about the fact that Johnny Cash is going to fall in love with her or any of that. Just, we need a good singer. And June Carter is, she is an impressive woman. Honestly, I mean, she was gorgeous in her heyday and throughout her life. She was a part of the Carter family, but she was not known for her singing when she was doing Carter family stuff as much as she was for her antics. She was funny. Like she was a comedian. She'd taken some acting courses, and she was a great stage presence, right? And Johnny, fell for her hard. I do want to talk about Carter family for just a second here. You should check, anybody who's listening has any interest in American roots music should take a listen to some of the Carter family stuff. Some of it is great. It's like Appalachian, Virginia music. They've been on the radio forever. We could probably do a whole episode on just the Carters, honestly. They were
might be time to do it.
Yeah. So, they played a lot of old standards, but they would sort of bring them out of wherever they're from, songs that nobody even knows who they wrote, like Keep on the Sunny Side, Wabash Cannonball, that sort of stuff. Anyway, so they bring her into the show. One of the things, and they sort of become, as they're touring, they fall for each other kind of at the same time, Johnny and June, but they kind of keep distance from each other a little bit because she's also married. And she's married to actually this super interesting guy, this guy named Rip Nix, which, what an incredible name. R-I-P-N-I-X.
He was either going to be married to June Carter or he was going to play baseball.
Yeah, well, he was a famous Alabama football player.
Hey, yeah, great. He just got a great sports name, Rip Nix.
He does. He was also quite the boat racer. Apparently, at one time, he held a world speed record in a boat, which doesn't really matter, but is just
cool.
Interesting dude. Yeah, so Johnny and June are touring together, and they're kind of fighting off their mutual attraction. And plus, she realizes how pilled up he is, and she realizes that's kind of an issue. But over time, they're just getting closer and closer and closer. It's kind of undeniable.
They're singing duets and things.
Yeah. Jackson. Yeah. We're going to Jackson and all of that. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to fight. So 1964 comes around, and it's not clear when the relationship was actually consummated. I mean, I suppose only they really know. But when it was kind of obvious it was going to be over with Vivian, Johnny and June and the rest of the band played at the Hollywood Bowl, which is in 1964, which is still a big venue now. They played at the Hollywood Bowl, and Johnny's family lives in California now. Johnny had actually bought his parents a trailer park to operate and live in, which is, I thought, kind of a cool thing. So anyway, Cash's family, Vivian, the kids, they all come to this Hollywood Bowl show. And as Johnny had instructed them, they were supposed to come out to the artist parking lot after the show. They come out there. Johnny and June are clearly close to each other. And Johnny just sort of says hi, and they just get in the back of the Cadillac, Johnny and June together, and leave. And Vivian is just well, obviously I'm nothing. The family's nothing. We don't matter to this guy.
You're talking about darkness. I mean, there it is.
Right.
What are you going to do?
Yeah.
There's this great love story. They love each other.
They do, right? And it's tricky.
Well, and of course, how could Vivian even I want to speak ill, but I mean, there's just, how can you relate? How could she possibly relate to what Johnny Cash is going through at this point?
Yeah, there's barely anybody who can, right?
Right.
And June's there all the time, and she's charming, and she's lovely, and
she knows she's probably comfortable on the road. She's not an addict.
Right.
She grew up in it.
Right. Exactly. So I'm going to give you a little after that. Give you a little snapshot of what home life was like for Johnny Cash when he wasn't on the road. Okay. When he got back to Casita Springs, that's where they lived, the atmosphere was unbearable. And for all the couple's hopes, as the couple being Johnny and Vivian, for all the couple's hopes of shielding their problems from the children, it impacted everyone in the Cash household. It was as if darkness suddenly fell on what had been a picture-perfect time for the youngsters. Unable to face Vivian and not wanting to frighten the girls, Cash would bolt out of the house at all hours of the day and night, get into his car, and he wrote later, drive recklessly for hours through the streets and into the hills and deserts of California until I wrecked the car or finally stopped from exhaustion.
This is something else I was going to say earlier when we were talking about the pills and everything. Part of the problem is Johnny Cash doesn't have to be up at 8 a.m. to go to work. Yeah. And I'm not a big fan of the whole wagey lifestyle, right? Like I'm a big work from home guy, and I'm an artist myself, and I would love to never have to wake up on time ever again. Yeah. But it can lead to problems, and
not everybody can handle that.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe not even most people can handle that.
Right. There is a reason that society writ large kind of puts these bumpers up and says, you probably should be in bed by midnight on a Tuesday. We got to get up and we got to do something, because really the devil kind of lingers at around 1:30 in the morning.
If nobody has to do anything, like this whole thing's going to go off the rails.
Yeah. As we've seen over the past 2 years. I mean, I continue to say that what America needs more than anything else is a school night.
It's a school night.
We need a school night.
Get in bed on time. And
everybody's got to be in bed on time, and you got to be up at 7:30 and breakfast in the mouth and off to back at it.
Right. So, okay. So he's fallen in love with June, and eventually they do get married. I think the Vivian and Johnny Cash divorce is, I believe, in 1966. If I don't have that, 1966.
And now the Beatles are definitely in the background, and somebody like Johnny Cash is going to be threatened by that. That's going to be a problem. But yes, go on. Yeah.
So now Cash is like starting to become, I want to say, almost politically relevant around the mid 60s, because he occupies this interesting space, right? We said he's sort of progressive in terms of his personal relationships. When he gets busted in El Paso for amphetamines, because basically what happens is he goes into Mexico, buys pills, brings them back to America, and he gets busted. Serves like I don't even think he really serves any real jail time, but there's a very menacing photo of him in sunglasses, like being arrested, and that turned him into that, like amplified this bad boy image. Then this weird thing happens, and this struck me about what his position in society was, and how sometimes it wasn't handled properly. There's some press photos of him around this time of the arrest, and there's Vivian standing next to him in the photos. And now generally America they knew Johnny Cash, but they didn't necessarily know Vivian, right? And they see a picture of her. And honestly, she looks in some of these photos from this time, she looks like a black woman. Okay. This is a problem, right? I don't think it's a problem. I don't care. Anybody can marry anybody.
Placing ourselves in the time.
Right. In a country musician, right? This is a problem. And so there's like a white supremacist group. It's not the KKK. It's somebody else who's trying to seem a little more up and up, but a white supremacist group nonetheless, comes out with like an attack campaign on Johnny Cash. I mean, you shouldn't listen to him. He's a drug addict. He's marrying a black woman, all of this.
And a Catholic.
Right. It's the whole thing and this is where it gets really weird, because what Cash and his people should have done is said, who cares about the black woman thing, right? Like, whatever.
Well, and she's not black.
She's not.
Or she's, wow.
Yeah, she's not. She just looks like it, right? She looks like she could be.
Right.
And what the management team does instead, the rebuttal, is they come out with like a genealogy of Vivian. They're like, well, she's not black. What she happens to be is she's 1/4 Sicilian, and so they're basically saying, like, you would be right to be upset. However, right?
Oh man,
that is not how to handle that.
The wrong side
of
history there.
Yeah, exactly. And so Johnny Cash kind of frequently finds himself in this weird spot, right? Like he has this great. I watched this documentary about him when he went to play. He went to play at the White House for Richard Nixon, of all people.
I think I heard about this. Yeah, that's pretty funny.
I'll tell you a little bit about that. But one thing that happened is this, and this I felt like very, very well typified, like where Johnny Cash sort of sat politically. He said he was trying to tell people, like, you know, it's there. I'm willing to fight for the right of these people to burn the flag, right? But if you come to my house and try to burn my flag, I'm going to shoot you. Right. That's where he's sitting. Right?
I'm completely with Johnny Cash.
Right.
You are totally free to burn your own flag, but if you take mine, if you take my Killdozer flag and you try to burn it, you're going to get shot.
Right. And so this is this position he sits in. Now he goes and this is a little bit out of order, but it's the right time to talk about it. He eventually does play at the Nixon White House.
If I may, didn't Nixon want him to play a certain playlist? And
there was 2 songs that he wanted Johnny to play. One was a song, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. It's probably in my notes somewhere, but one is a song that basically mocks people who take advantage of welfare. It has lyrics about like, hey, I've never worked a day in my life, but I just bought a new Cadillac. I got 12 kids to feed. But, you know, it's one of these things about somebody exploiting that system. It was a well-known kind of comic song. So Richard Nixon wanted him to play that. And Richard Nixon wanted him to play a song called Muskogee. And Muskogee was all about how, like, we don't smoke dope. And
it's an Okie from Muskogee. Yeah, it's Merle Haggard.
We don't smoke dope in Muskogee. We cut our hair short in Muskogee. Yeah. It's all this kind of like making fun of hippie stuff.
That's the one that made Merle famous, and it was like an anthem for what did Nixon call people, the silent majority. Sort of an anthem for
Right. Johnny Cash did not play either one of those songs. He instead played a song called, which as a song in and of itself is kind of terrible, to be honest. But he instead played a song called What is Truth? And the What is Truth song, it is all these things like, you see, you know, the lyrics are, we could even like maybe even look up some of the lyrics, but the lyrics are all about, actually look some of those up.
Yeah, I recall this story. I quite like that. Of course, I look up what is truth, and that's, you definitely have to add song at the end. Yeah. Otherwise, you're going to end up in some philosophy 101.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to read all of the lyrics, but like, a young man sitting on the witness stand. The man with the book says, "Raise your hand. Repeat after me. I solemnly swear." The man looked down at his long hair, and although the young man solemnly swore, nobody seems to hear anymore. And it didn't really matter if the truth was there. It was the cut of his clothes and the length of his hair, and the lonely voice of youth cries, "What is truth?" Right? It was this whole thing about, like, he was trying to position, like, not even saying that the younger generation was like right, but like, hey, listen to like what they're trying to say, or like what they're trying to figure out. Like, give them the opportunity to sort through all this, like Vietnam, like probably all of this stuff, right?
That's one of his answers to Bob Dylan, I would say.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. So
and Nixon must have been furious.
Right.
Yeah.
He never really said anything publicly about it because he wanted to court Johnny Cash. He wanted Richard Nixon didn't care about country music. Richard Nixon listened to like classical music, but like he wanted Johnny Cash in his
I like to think of like Richard Nixon just listened to like Wagner, but with like his own swears over it, just his screaming rants at the Secretary of State. He'd have like a stereo system. Right. Listening to Strauss, and then himself.
He was something else, man.
He had a reputation. He had a potty mouth. Nixon.
Oh, he did. Those tapes. Yeah. Anytime I hear, I've never like sat down and listened to a bunch of them, but anytime like the secret tapes show up in something, he's always saying something terrible.
Just horrible.
Just like something that you're like, really? Like,
I love the Nixon thread in Lebowski. There's a little slight Nixon shows up on one of it's in the poster bowling, and
right. Yeah. There's some so that was a certain time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk a little bit like so that we're actually jumping back. I think the Nixon thing happened when I don't know exactly what year, but we'll go back to 1968. Cash had not
1970 is when he was in the White House.
Right. Okay. So a couple years before that, 1968, we get the famous Folsom Prison show. Cash had actually played San Quentin before that, but they hadn't done like a live recording to turn into an album, and they decided that they were going to. Cash hadn't had a hit in like 5 or 6 years. He could play shows, and he was still a bit of a draw, but he hadn't really had a hit. And, there had been controversy. Now he'd been divorced, which was kind of a big deal, much bigger deal than it would be now. Now it would be sort of a blip in celebrity news, but then it was
big stigma.
Right.
Yeah.
And, he'd been arrested, and it was publicly known that he had a drug problem or was involved in drugs or something. I don't know that people even thought of it as like, oh, poor Johnny has a drug problem. I don't know that people framed it like that in their mind.
Things have really changed around that, and it's happened in the past 20 years or so.
Yeah. Now if a celebrity gets busted for an addictive drug, it's like, oh man, I hope he gets it together.
Yeah. I think everybody's sort of figured out that it's a disease and it's a lot bigger than one person's moral failing.
Right.
That still kind of lingers a little bit, but
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But especially when it's
like
lot.
Repeated. If it's like a repeated, eventually like a Scott Weiland, eventually it's like, man, what is wrong with it?
Right.
But and not to say that even that's fair, but the perception has changed. And at that time, to be arrested for amphetamines
in El Paso.
Yeah.
And now you're divorced and he's in the country music scene, and that might as well just be Christian music.
Right.
This is Southern Christian music.
Right. Absolutely. And well, this is one thing that I learned about country music in preparing for this episode that I think is really interesting. The heart of country music, especially early on, was going over the line on Saturday night and then stumbling into the church on Sunday to beg for forgiveness.
Sunday morning coming down.
Exactly. That's the spin in country music. That's one of the sort of hearts of it. And Johnny Cash was sort of living that moment to moment. He'd release a gospel album and he'd be high on pills the whole time he did it, right? Very much in that circuit.
There's not a sadder song than Sunday morning coming down.
Oh no.
That song is so sad.
Right.
What is it? What is the lyric? And there's it's nothing short of dying. I got to remember the lyric. I got to look it up.
It's a great song. It's actually written by Chris Christopherson.
Is that right?
Who's one of the great songwriters.
Yeah, you're in the middle of it, but I'll look it up because I want to.
Look that up. It's an amazing song. So anyway, but here's the thing about all the pills and the divorce and all of this. This makes it, by the time he hits 1968 and he's going to do a show at Folsom Prison, everybody in that prison, all the inmates, they respect him. He's an outlaw. This guy's on the edge. He's one of us. He's one of us come home to play. And this is the thing too. It's not like now where you could look up the Wikipedia of Johnny Cash and be like, oh, so he was arrested for, yes, I see. Okay. I mean, probably a third of those people believed he shot somebody in Reno.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right. You don't have the factual thing.
Well, it's that same myth making that hip hop, that gangster rap would play with in the 90s. What's real, what's not? How was Jay-Z really slinging? Like what? Right. Like do we know? I mean, it's not clear how much,
Right.
Yeah.
And
very
so
similar.
So it's whether you can buy into it. And if there's a picture that was in the newspaper of you looking like a criminal being arrested, then you're one of us, right?
Yeah.
So he plays this show. He is high to the gills, but it's one of the times, unlike Carnegie Hall, unlike a lot of these other shows, where Johnny pulls it together. And folks, if you have not listened to Live from Folsom Prison, if you've never heard it, I envy you, because I would love to hear that again for the first time.
Get to the end of this episode of Art of Darkness, subscribe to the Patreon, listen to the After Dark episode, and then immediately stop what you're doing and listen to Live at Folsom Prison.
It's amazing, and it holds up, and it's every song is what they would call a banger on that one. It's
and the energy of the audience, and it's definitely theater of the mind.
Right, it really is.
Put it on, get it on vinyl if you can.
Oh yeah.
Do it big. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. The banter is great. There's little funny bits. And then they produced it in this really interesting way. Like they left little fragments of like the guards making announcements over the PA. Yeah. And there's like a little bit of like the doors banging. Like they left enough of that in that you understand you're at a prison. And there's one point, which is my favorite part in it, and I didn't even know what this was until I had looked it up after hearing. Because the first time I heard this, I was like 18, and I got immersed in the mythology of it. There's a point where Johnny Cash goes, "Suey!"
Yeah, yeah.
That is Suey. What you say when you're collaring hogs.
Yeah.
When you're like corralling hogs on the farm.
Yeah.
And he's yelling that at the prison guards.
Mm.
Right, so he's basically calling them pigs.
Right? I did not know that. I did not know that.
Such a gangster move, right? Just looking them dead in the eye.
Yeah,
hog hollering them. It's so good.
Awesome.
So it's it's a great album, and this is like everyone knew it was a great album, right? It won Grammys. It sold a ridiculous. It did everything you could imagine.
It knocked Sgt. Pepper off,
right?
Number one in America, and is the reason that Pepper wasn't number one for as long as it was in the UK.
And Sgt. Pepper. This is the thing. Okay, to put it in perspective, I heard about Sgt. Pepper recently. There was a time right after Sgt. Pepper was released, in like the week that it came out, that if you got into a car in New York, you could drive all the way to Los Angeles and a Sgt. Pepper song could be on your radio for the entire drive. Like that's how omnipresent that album was, right?
I believe that.
So this is maybe almost to that same level of being everywhere. And
right. If you took the northern route, you're definitely going to have that. If you take the southern route, you're going to get Johnny Cash.
Right.
And, exactly. And it's that kind of funny divide. I think this is the lyric from Sunday Morning coming down.
Yeah.
Listen to this. On a Sunday morning sidewalk, I'm wishing, Lord, that I was stoned, because there's something in a Sunday makes a body feel alone, and there's nothing short of dying, half as lonesome as the sound on a sleepy city sidewalk Sunday morning coming down.
Man,
every walk of shame you've ever taken on Sunday morning, knowing you should be at church,
right.
Your life is going to pieces, and you're praying to God that you just wish you could be high again.
Right.
What a mess. Oh. Yeah.
Oof.
All right.
So we're gonna skip a whole lot because I want to get to the Rick Rubin stuff.
Yeah,
but
that's
fine. I'm just gonna give you some highlights, some like this year this thing happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
1965. This is before the Folsom Prison thing, but it's worth noting, and it's just an interesting factoid. 1965, he burns down 500 acres of the Los Padres National Forest watershed, killing 49 endangered condors, and he was a totally defiant prick about it.
How did he do that?
It's not clear. He was hanging out. He had like this RV, and he would go drive out into the desert and stuff, and he had his nephew with him. And his nephew and he got in an argument about pills, and his nephew like went off to go, I don't know, look in a river or something. And when he came back, Johnny is like trying to beat this fire out of a bush. So it's like something from his RV sparked it or something. It's not clear exactly what happened.
Cigarette. It could have been a little fire they had going.
Yeah. And it was pretty crazy. Like Johnny Cash, the two of them got into the river because the fire was all around them. So it was like the only way that they could like keep from getting burnt to death, basically. And actually, since we're talking about this, because it's kind of a crazy story, there's a little anecdote from the court case about it. I'm not condoning this behavior, but I think it's funny.
Yeah, none of this behavior we condone. Don't break up hotel rooms. Stay with your first wife if at all possible.
Right. Just trying to understand the man who made Live at Folsom Prison blues.
Right.
Live at Folsom Prison.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is about the Los Padres fire. Cash was equally disingenuous when asked by forestry officials investigating the cause of the burn how the fire got started. He blamed it on sparks from a defective exhaust system on his camper. When a judge later questioned Cash about the fire, he was equally defiant. Quote, "I didn't do it. My truck did, and it's dead, so you can't question it." Asked during a deposition about the loss of 49 of the region's 53 condors in the blaze, he certainly didn't make any friends when he snapped, "I don't care about your damn yellow buzzards." Okay. That's 1965. 1966, gets divorced from Vivian. The June Carter thing's going on. 1967, this is before the Folsom Show again. He has this thing that happens in Nickelback Cave. He's so distraught over his marriage ending because, again, he's a religious guy and he's so hopped up on pills and everything. He's all over the place and his career's not going well by his standards, even though he's making more money than, he's making a ton of money touring, but the shows are 50-50 good, whatever. He wanders into this cave called Nickelback Cave. And this is a cave where literally people have gone and gotten lost and died. He wanders in there. I'm going to give you one more little reading on this. And again, I'm kind of just jumping, but these are all like little interesting bits that I don't want to totally lose. Okay, when recounting the darkness, this is again from the Hilburn biography. When recounting the darkness of the fall of 67, Cash invariably told three stories that had been repeated time and again in books and articles, one of which involves an alleged suicide attempt. The first step in his march toward regaining his will to live supposedly occurred in early October when, as he later explained it, he went into the historic Nickajack Cave. He had often explored the massive system of caves looking for souvenirs from the Civil War or early Native American relics. On this occasion, Cash, buried under the remorse over the breakup of his marriage, decided it was too painful to keep on living. Nickajack contained the remains of many spelunkers and amateur adventurers who lost their lives in the caves over the years. He writes in his second biography, "I thought if I crawled far enough in, I'd never be able to find my way back out, and nobody would be able to locate me until I was dead, if indeed they ever could." According to his account, he parked his Jeep outside and crawled through the cave for 2 or 3 hours until the batteries gave out in his flashlight, and he lay down in the darkness preparing to die. "The absolute lack of light was appropriate," he wrote, "for at that moment I was as far from God as I have ever been. My separation from him, the deepest and most ravaging of the various kinds of loneliness I'd felt over the years, seemed finally complete. But then something came over him. I thought I'd left him, but he hadn't left me," Cash continued. "I felt something very powerful start to happen to me, a sensation of utter peace, clarity, and sobriety. I didn't believe it at first. I couldn't understand it. How after being awake for so long and driving my body so hard and taking so many pills, dozens of them, scores, even hundreds, could I possibly feel all right? There in Nickajack Cave, I became conscious of a very clear, simple idea. I was going to die at God's time, not mine. I hadn't prayed over my decision to seek death in the cave, but that hadn't stopped God from intervening." Cash made his way out of the cave, aided by a wisp of air that guided him to an exit, where he found June and his mother waiting with a basket of food and drink. "I knew there was something wrong," his mother told him. He wrote, I had to come and find you." He supposedly decided then and there to quit drugs, though he didn't. In all his drug days and nights, Cash likely did sometimes feel sufficiently trapped and devoid of hope that he wanted to give up on life. Nevertheless, the problem with the story and the way Cash told it is twofold. One, he didn't give up drugs. Two, Nickaback Cave. They call it Nickajack over here and Nickaback here. I don't know which one it is.
That might be a typo.
Yeah. Nickaback Cave was underwater in the fall of 1967, as a Cash historian discovered in extensive checks. So who knows if this even happened, but it was certainly a story that he liked.
Nickajack. It is Nickajack.
Is it Nickajack? Yeah, it says it's
partially flooded cave in Marion County, Tennessee.
Yeah,
sounds like Johnny Cash might have made something up there.
Yeah, he was known to be a little bit of a, he knew how to tell a yarn. 1968, this is just a crazy thing. Luther Perkins dies from smoking in bed.
He lights his bed on fire and dies that way. What a way to go.
Yeah, right.
Oh.
And 1968, he's about Johnny's age, so he's 40s, 45. He'd been a mechanic and ridden with Cash this whole rise to fame, and then
you're just smoking in bed and you ash in bed and it all goes up in flames and you die that way.
Sucks.
Yeah, that does.
That's
suck.
Just months after the Folsom Show.
No.
Yeah, right.
He's the guitarist, right?
He was. Yeah. There's actually a moment in the movie, in the Walk the Line movie, where the Luther character is smoking a cigarette, is like falling asleep smoking a cigarette. Maybe it's on the tour bus. I can't remember. And Johnny like takes a cigarette from him and puts it out, and that's a nod to the biographical fact of this happening.
Good to know.
That happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't smoke in bed.
No. 1969, Johnny Cash gets his own TV show. It is a huge hit. Many people watch it. lasts for several years. And Johnny gets to like bring on all kinds of musicians. Like Bob Dylan is on there. Ray Charles is on there, so it's like country
that's cool.
music. It's a lot of black musicians.
Is it just the Johnny Cash show?
It is. Yeah. It's like an old school variety show, basically, right? And it's mostly they play music, and it brings the family on and whatever. 1970, June Carter gives birth to a boy, John Carter Cash, and this makes Johnny make a turn to family. It not only makes him like turn toward family, but he turns towards his daughters, who he'd kind of left in the lurch, which there ends up being a major reconciliation with the girls. He makes a real effort to like, he will take the girls for an entire summer, and he'll take time off the road, and he tries to patch that up. And in the end, his daughters have nothing but good things to say about how it's kind of ended, even if their young childhood was a little on the rough side. So that's 1970s. He kind of gets back into pills. This is an ongoing thing. I'm not even going to really chart when he was on them, when he was off them. He does go to the Betty Ford clinic. That seems to work for a while. But he's doing drugs at least into the mid to the late 80s, it seems. Here's one anecdote. He had a wildlife preserve in Tennessee. And he literally got attacked by an ostrich on his own wildlife preserve. He got his stomach torn open by the talon of the ostrich. And apparently the only thing that kept it from like ripping out his manhood was the claw hit his belt buckle and like couldn't go past there. But it tore him open. And he
just the same way that his brother was torn open. Right. What are the odds?
Right?
That ostrich was channeling some sort of demon.
It's kind of crazy, right?
Oof.
And I got mixed reports about this, but apparently like this was another like, oh my God, I have to like quit my, doing drugs and all this. But
you're probably not behaving appropriately around the ostrich if you're high, high as a kite.
Right. He's just lurching around or whatever. But apparently he had hidden some drugs in his bandages, and they got damp and absorbed into his bloodstream. And he basically had like almost like an OD experience.
Wow.
Now the biography didn't say that, but his autobiography does. And so I'm not sure if that actually happened, because he kind of tells tales. But
bit of a fabulist.
Yes. Here. Yeah.
We wouldn't have it any other way though.
No. Okay. So into the 80s, again, the career kind of ups and downs. He does have a big thing that goes on with what some people might know as the Highwaymen, which is Willie Nelson, Johnny, and Waylon Jennings. This was actually pretty popular.
There was a fourth too.
Chris Christopherson, I think.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Yeah. So that was moderately successful. Johnny struggled with the touring a little bit, but like, hey man, he was back in the public eye again.
Can you imagine seeing that show? Come on,
right? It would have been something for sure.
Awesome.
Sure. It's okay. Time goes on. We're gonna fast forward 1992. He's inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, right? Like he's not having hits anymore, but there's a thing that happens. You're starting to get Lifetime Achievement Awards and Hall of Fame awards, and they feel good. And at the same time, and Johnny says this somewhere, it's like getting a "you're washed up" award or "you're done" award.
Being put out to pasture.
Right. And everybody's loves you, and they're clapping for you, but they're also saying like, okay, you're done. Like, go retire. And that wasn't going to be his vibe. In the mid 90s, there's this fascinating juxtaposition. So have you ever heard of the town of Branson, Missouri?
Sure, I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's like the Midwest's Atlantic City, sort of, right?
Okay.
It's like casinos and shows and things. And it was a very deliberate thing. Like somebody got a bunch of money and like they're like, we're going to make this town be an attraction and people are going to come here and whatever. And so Johnny Cash kind of gets wrapped up in this. He was going to have his own theater there, but then it was like there were multiple developers for Branson, and his developer kind of dropped the ball. And so he didn't end up getting his own theater, but he was going to play shows at the Wayne Newton Theater.
Okay.
And so he's at this point in the 90s where he's literally playing like a midday casino show for people getting off a tour bus. Right.
Yeah, the casino show moment for Johnny Cash doesn't necessarily sit that well.
Yeah.
That's a good indicator though of kind of where he landed.
Right. And so in the midst of this is going on, and clearly he doesn't like it, and he's made attempts to like do different kinds of recordings with different people, and it's never really working other than that brief flash with the Highwaymen, which was just, I think they did make 2 albums, but they didn't push it super hard. And he, at this time when the Branson, Missouri stuff is going on, he meets Rick Rubin.
Yeah.
Right.
You're crazy for this one, Rick.
Right. Exactly. And he didn't know who Rick Rubin was. I mean, Rick Rubin started Def Jam. Like, what does
that have to do with Johnny Cash?
So it took some time to convince Cash to really even talk to Rick Rubin. And so eventually, but he's also seeing at the same time,
like the sandwich.
Right. Right. But at the same time, he's playing these stupid Branson shows.
Yeah.
It's like, this
playing a casino for blue hairs.
Yeah. This isn't how I want to go out. He'd been at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I do want to give you one anecdote. He'd been at the Rock and Roll Hall. He was also on a U2 album before the American recording stuff.
I think I knew that.
Yeah, because Bono loved him.
Did he sing on that album?
He did, yeah, one song. Yeah, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but one song. It's actually pretty good. The production doesn't really fit his voice all that great, but it's not bad. But he had this moment where he's at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame getting inducted, and he goes to the bathroom and he hears somebody behind him singing like one of his, Johnny Cash does, hears somebody behind him singing like one of his more obscure songs, a song called Loadin' Coal. Like, doesn't even show up on greatest hits albums, and he turns around and it's Keith Richards.
Hey,
singing this, like, right? And so there's like this thing where like, okay, they're putting me out the pasture, but like, I'm still something, like I still matter in this world. So anyway, he finally does get convinced to go talk to Rick Rubin, and he doesn't really know who Rick Rubin is. And he just knows that people tell him that this guy matters, but Cash also knows that he's got to do something, right? Like this Branson thing, this isn't how he's going to go out. And he asks Rick, he's sort of like, well, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want to do for me, with me? Like, what is this? And Rick's like, I just want to sit down and I want you to just sing whatever you want to sing. That's all I want. I want you to sit down with your guitar and sing whatever you want to sing. And Johnny loves this idea. He had for years in his head the idea to make an album that was just going to be Johnny and his guitar, and it was going to be called Johnny Cash Late and Alone. Right. And so Rick Rubin like basically gave him the opportunity to make this. And I didn't realize how extended this Rick Rubin period was. It ends up being like almost 10 years.
Yeah, it's one of the greatest collaborations in American music.
Yeah, it's 5. It's basically 5 albums. Some of them are, there's songs on there that are just incredible.
It also culminates in the greatest cover of all time.
It does. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so the first album was great. Rick Rubin was enthralled with it. Rick Rubin was particularly impressed by the fact that Johnny Cash knew the words and the melody to what he said was hundreds of songs. Like Johnny Cash could just sit there and play hundreds of songs without looking anything up, which, is just an incredible. It's not even necessarily a musical talent.
It's just so
much
cool.
As right. And you can imagine you're Rick Rubin, just you and him, you got a microphone, and you're just going to chill out and you're going to listen to Johnny Cash play 25 songs in a row.
Right. I like what you did there, Johnny.
Right. And so they committed to the vinyl, and it does really well. And the first album is all acoustic, and the second album they start adding some elements. They bring in Tom Petty and they bring in all of these other things. And it's this great mix of, if you listen through the American series, it's this great mix of Johnny Cash songs. There's very few, if any, where he's like re-recording like an old hit, but he does a lot of songs that are like standards. Mm-hmm. He does a lot of songs that he wrote, and then he does a lot of covers that you wouldn't expect. So the Hurt 9 Inch Nails cover was the most famous, but he also does Soundgarden's Rusty Cage.
Yep, Rusty Cage. I'm going to take this Rusty Cage and run.
Yeah. Right? He does Personal Jesus.
Something like that. Yeah, Your Own. Yeah, he does Depeche Mode. I forgot about that.
It's a good cover. And there's there's a handful of others.
It's the greatest third act of all time.
Right.
One of the greatest. Yeah. And again, it is the greatest cover of all time. His cover of Hurt, there's no greater cover ever.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
And most people will,
The video is great too. As a video, it's fantastic. I mean, the House of Cash, which was like his museum, it had been closed, and so they take shots of it like dilapidated, basically. And then he's sitting in his and one of the shots that they sort of intermix is he's sitting at a table with like a feast, right? And he's singing the song, and June is looking at him very concerned. What you don't really realize is that she had recently found out that she had a terminal diagnosis and she was dying. And she's in this video, she's looking at him very concerned. And at the end of the video, he just pours wine all over all of this food, right? It's just dramatic and gorgeous. But that whole series is just rife with these beautiful songs. I See a Darkness, like people should check out that song. That was a Billy Prince, I can't say his name.
Prince Billy, is that
it? Prince Billy. Yes, I was looking for the right. I had all the syllables, but in the wrong order. Yeah, that I See a Darkness is incredible. There's just so many. There's so many great songs on it. Now, as they're going through, Rick Rubin and Johnny are going through this process. Johnny is basically, I hate to say it, but he's starting to die. He's already not that great when he meets Rick Rubin, and you know he's trying to record every day, but he's getting sicker and sicker. They thought he had Parkinson's for a while, but they found out that it really wasn't. And then they thought it was something else. And then eventually they just called it autonomic neuropathy, which it's like a lot of these diseases. Nobody really knows what it is. They just cluster a bunch of symptoms together. I don't doubt that it was something like Parkinson's, probably from taking amphetamines your whole life.
He wasn't that old. I mean, he was in his 60s. This is a rock and roll, but he was a rock and roller in his 60s. He was a hardcore, country, outlaw country, rock and roll. 65 is not the school teacher in the suburbs 65.
Right. And he looks, that last Hurt video, like he looks like he's deep into his 80s to me. Like he's looking pretty rough. And so he's getting sicker and sicker. And then June dies, and that's terrible. It's heartbreaking. That was the love of his life. You know, they'd had their issues, but they were madly in love and they were made for each other. And he starts to gradually go blind. So the image, you know, what I want to paint for you is Johnny walking a country road by himself in the middle of nowhere at night singing. Johnny laying in the desert, high out of his mind, looking up at the stars. And then Johnny in a dark room by himself, barely able to see, recording his last song that he wrote over and over and revised, which is The Man Comes Around.
Oh.
And The Hurt is incredible, but also, and if you were listening to anything from that American recording series, The Man Comes Around is a brilliant piece of work. And that was one of the last things he ever recorded.
And that's an original. That's him.
That's an original. Yeah. I think it wasn't the last song he recorded, but it was the last song he wrote. And it's gorgeous.
Yeah. Man Comes Around is what it's called. The Man Comes Around. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me give you a little taste of some of those lyrics, because this is kind of the end here. I'm not going to read you the whole song, but like, I mean, it's a deeply religious song, right? So hear the trumpets, hear the pipers, 100 million angels singing, multitudes are marching to the big kettle drum, voices calling, voices crying, some are born and some are dying. It's Alpha and Omega's kingdom come, and the whirlwind is in the thorn tree. The virgins are all trimming their wicks. The whirlwind is in the thorn trees. It's hard for thee to kick against the pricks, in measured hundredweight and penny bound, when the man comes around. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts, and I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. Just this, like,
it's so great. That's a great song.
It feels like a Bible. It feels like something out of Ecclesiastes or something. It's epic, and he put everything he had into that, you know. And I like to think of that as the last thing that rolled out of his hand, you know, as he passed on
in the sunken lands.
In the sunken lands.
and only Johnny Cash could have written and sung that song.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And that's what a great artist does.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's Johnny Cash, and he, died 2003. He died having recently won an MTV Music Video Award for Video of the Year. Right? You went from seeing Elvis's first live performance to winning an MTV Music Award, like in the millennial generation. Right? It's just an incredible career, and
God bless Johnny Cash. Well done, Brad. That was a good one. All right. Wow. Now I'm ready. I'm ready to. I'm gonna go. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm probably gonna go put on some of the old stuff for my daughter, and I have some of it on vinyl. I have the second Folsom recording.
Okay. Yeah.
I actually think I have the big one too. I might bust that out. My baby son likes to tear our vinyl to pieces, so it's hiding in the basement right now.
Be careful.
Man, and
and
put
on a boy named Sue for him. Put on a boy named Sue.
Yeah, I'm going to change your name, Anthony, if you're not careful. I'm going to start calling you. So that's a good tune too. That's funny. You got to forget his. Oh, is that? Oh, I remember that. Right. Yeah, Shelby. Yeah. It's easy to forget too that there's a sense of humor in this stuff. It's not all dirge and heavy. Yeah. Really cool.
He's a funny guy.
Yeah. One of the greatest Americans, man.
Really, really and truly. And you really can't tell the 20th. I think you can't tell. And there's a lot of people who are like this, but he's certainly one of them. You cannot tell the story of 20th century American culture without Johnny Cash. It doesn't make sense without him.
Love it. And this is the Art of Darkness podcast. Brad, you did a great job. It was a lot of fun. We're going to go on for another 20, 30 minutes on the After Dark episode, which is available to Patreon subscribers. We really do encourage you to subscribe. You get a little bit of extra content. We put a lot of effort into these episodes. So if you want to chuck a buck, we appreciate that. And, and if not that, go on iTunes and give us 5 stars. People look at those things. It's silly, but we think we deserve it. If you don't think we deserve 5 stars, get on Twitter and tell us why, and we'll block you. No, we won't block you.
Haven't blocked anybody yet.
I don't think we blocked anybody yet. But Brad runs the Art of Darkness Twitter account. It's at Art of Dark Pod, and then of course the website's artofdarkpod.com. You also really have me excited because we took a little hiatus. You got hitched. I got stuck in Green Bay. But now we're back. We're going to be doing 2 of these a month minimum. And up next for me is Marlon Brando. Ooh. I'm very excited. I've got 3 very thick books.
Nice.
And my lady's very excited because she loves all the old classic movies. Nice. So it's going to be a Marlon Brando movie every day in the Kautzman house here for the next week.
Awesome. That's I style my hair after the late Brando, the Apocalypse Now Brando. So I'm in.
All right, we'll talk more on the After Dark episode.
Absolutely.
All right, great.